Hello guys, today let's begin with the story of my simulated path to immortality. In the city of Zhangjing of the great Shen nation, at the mansion of the Grand Preceptor, a grand birthday celebration was underway. The protagonist of this story, Li Fan, sat at the center of it all. Despite his advanced age, his imposing presence remained unchanged. Over the past 50 years, Li Fan had risen from nothing to the peak of power. Once a poor scholar who had transmigrated into this world with empty hands, he now stood as the Grand Preceptor, a figure whose authority overshadowed the entire nation. Looking back on his life, Li Fan felt satisfied. He had achieved everything a mortal could ever want. The top floor of the manor was filled with music, wine, and dancers. Guests laughed and drank freely, enjoying the rare moment of peace and celebration. Then, a subordinate suddenly rushed in, his face pale with fear. He reported that the sky was ablaze, filled with falling flames, an ominous yet seemingly divine phenomenon. Worse still, the flames appeared to be heading straight toward the city. Li Fan immediately stepped onto the balcony. What he saw shocked him to the core. The flames were not natural. Two figures were battling in the sky. Their presence alone distorted the heavens, as if the world itself could not withstand their power. One of them shouted a name, Dao Xuanzi, warning him not to push things too far. Below them, people fell to their knees in terror, worshipping these godlike beings. But unlike the others, Li Fan quickly realized the true danger. These beings did not even acknowledge the existence of mortals. In the sky, the dark-haired cultivator Dao Xuanzi confronted Kong Hong, a sturdy man with golden hair resembling a lion's mane. Dao Xuanzi demanded that Kong Hong hand over his core formation method, declaring that the fight would not end unless one of them died. Kong Hong scoffed. For nearly 100 years, he had been trapped at the Foundation establishment stage due to lacking a core formation method. His lifespan was nearing its limit, and this newly obtained method was his only hope. How could he possibly give it up? Dao Xuanzi agreed on one thing. The Golden Core Dao was a path walked alone. Countless cultivators were trapped at Foundation establishment, and with longevity within reach, there was no reason to show mercy. They had been brothers for 100 years. Now they were enemies. Knowing he was weaker, Kong Hong glanced down at the city below and questioned whether Dao Xuanzi could withstand the immortal mortal miasma created by so many mortals. Dao Xuanzi responded by raising his sword. A terrifying purple blade cut through the sky. Kong Hong countered by summoning a massive golden dragon. The two techniques collided. The heavens erupted. A deafening explosion engulfed Zhangjing, flattening buildings and setting the city ablaze. When Li Fan regained consciousness, everything had changed. His mansion was reduced to rubble. His wife and children lay dead. Bodies filled the streets, and fire consumed what little remained. The once prosperous city had turned into a nightmare of blood and destruction. Less than 1 in 100 people had survived. Li Fan collapsed amid the ruins, laughter escaping his lips, not from joy, but from despair. So immortals truly existed. From that day onward, Li Fan became obsessed with the immortal path. Using the power of the empire, he searched the entire world, from the frozen seas in the north to the great ocean in the south, from the ruinous abyss in the east to the linked mountains in the west. He found nothing. Decades passed. Old and exhausted, Li Fan began to doubt whether those cultivators had ever been real, until he activated his unique treasure, Hanjin. Countless glowing texts appeared before him. When the true becomes false, the false becomes true. Hanjin completed its charge and asked whether he wished to return to the initial anchor point, the moment he first transmigrated into this world. This was already Li Fan's second life. In his first life, he had lived an ordinary existence. It was only after awakening Hanjin that he achieved his unstoppable rise. But this life was not over yet. After stabilizing the ruined city and confirming that there was no trace of the cultivators, Li Fan finally made his decision. Blue light enveloped him as time began to reverse. Scenes from his life flashed before his eyes. Two names remained firmly etched in his mind: Dao Xuanzi, Kong Hong. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 2, Lin fell into the swirling portal without hesitation, his heart filled with a single determination to hunt down the two immortals in his next life. By this point, riches, power, and honor had long lost their meaning. They were nothing more than fleeting clouds drifting across the sky of his existence. Soon after, the system activated once again, regressing Lin back to the anchor point of his life. In the first year, overwhelmed by joy at being reborn, Lin behaved strangely. His odd actions nearly caused his aunt to force him to drink exorcism water prepared by the village witch. Half a year later, he participated in the provincial examination. Though he placed only in the lower 30s, he still succeeded in becoming a Joren, finally bringing honor to his ancestors. In his second year, Lin passed the metropolitan examination. During the palace exam, he performed exceptionally well, earning second rank and receiving the title of Jinhur. Through careful maneuvering in Shenjing, he secured the position of county magistrate of Jiangnan County. By his third year, Lin began cultivating a trusted inner circle. At the same time, he secretly produced a batch of explosives and matchlock rifles. In the fifth year, refugees rebelled against Prince Lange's manor. Lin led troops to suppress the chaos, rescuing Prince Lange's family. The prince became deeply grateful to him. In the sixth year, Lin was promoted to prefect of Jianghai Prefecture and married the daughter of the vice minister of rights. In the seventh year, his wife bore him a son. By the 10th year, Princess Langia also gave birth to a son. Lin personally visited to offer his congratulations, presenting a carefully prepared gift. In the 15th year, the emperor passed away. Prince Langia ascended the throne and changed the era name to Shenjing. Emperor Shenjing summoned Lin to the capital, promoted him to vice minister of war, and ordered him to suppress rebellions across the land. By the 18th year, Lin had wiped out the rebel forces. The emperor reclaimed his military authority, but promoted him again, this time to minister of war and grand tutor to the crown prince. In the 20th year, the empress was suddenly implicated in a witchcraft scandal. Enraged, Emperor Shenjing confined her to the cold palace. The crown prince secretly sought Lin's help, and Lin agreed without hesitation. Through private investigation, he uncovered the truth and cleared the empress's name. Yet, despite this, the emperor refused to release her. In the 25th year, Lin received secret news. Someone had reported him for privately visiting the empress. That same year, the emperor was assassinated during a journey. The officials retrieved the empress from the cold palace, and the crown prince ascended the throne under the era name Kongning. In the 26th year, Lin was further ennobled as grand tutor and appointed grand scholar of the deliberative council, reaching the pinnacle of mortal authority. Using this position, he eliminated dissent and built his own faction within the imperial court. By his 30th year, the world knew only of the grand tutor, not the emperor. In the 31st year, the empress dowager became pregnant and bore a son. In the 38th year, Emperor Kongning died of depression. In the 40th year, the empress dowager passed away from illness. In the 45th year, Lin's wife died. In the 46th year, his eldest son succumbed to illness. Then, in the 50th year, the nightmare returned. Two immortals descended from the ruinous abyss, destroying the city of Shenjing. Lin barely escaped with his life. The simulation ended. The system presented four choices. First, retain an item from the simulation. Second, retain his cultivation realm. Third, inherit the memories of someone closely connected to him. Fourth, abandon all of the above to accelerate the charging progress. Lin pondered deeply. Was everything he experienced real, or merely an illusion so vivid that truth and falsehood no longer mattered? In the end, he set aside these thoughts and focused on survival. Stability was paramount. He chose the fourth option, accelerating Hanjin's charging progress. Across 3 lives, Lin had lived a total of 166 years. His mental age limit had also increased beyond 1,000 years. Though time eroded the soul, this would no longer be a problem once he stepped onto the path of cultivation. His goal in the next life was clear: learn the secrets of cultivation from the two immortals. In 50 years, they would descend once again. This time, he would be ready. Unable to wait idly, Lin sent people deep into the ruinous abyss to investigate. For the first time in countless years, his life had purpose again. The appearance of the immortals revealed a vast and alluring world beyond mortality. Lin longed to cultivate. In his next life, everything proceeded smoothly. He once again participated in the imperial examinations, this time achieving first place in all 3, shaking the entire world with his fame. He still chose to govern a single county, healing it swiftly through experience and foresight. Secretly, he replaced Prince Langia with a body double and seized control from the shadows. Years later, even Princess Langia's child was secretly his. Step by step, Lin manipulated fate itself. In the 35th anchor year, reports confirmed the truth. The ruinous abyss concealed an inverted world of mountains, cities, and even a city in the sky. The immortals had indeed come from there, yet no method could withstand the terrifying astral winds guarding the abyss. And so, Lin waited. Finally, the 50th anchor year arrived. On a moonlit night, 2 overwhelming auras once again clashed in the heavens. As Kohong shouted Duan's name, fiery projectiles suddenly streaked toward them from below. For the first time, the immortals were attacked. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 3, below them, several armed soldiers moved with lawless coordination, firing their rifles relentlessly at the 2 cultivators. The sound of gunfire echoed like thunder across the city. Kohong casually raised his hand. In an instant, every bullet froze in midair. He stared at the suspended projectiles, confusion flashing across his face. What were these strange objects? Curiosity quickly replaced his surprise. With a flick of his fingers, flames surged forth, disarming one of the soldiers and pulling a peculiar metal weapon into his grasp. A rifle. Kohong examined it carefully, incredulous. The weapon relied on intricate mechanical structures instead of formations, and explosive force instead of spiritual energy. To think that after thousands of years, the mortals exiled to this land of immortal extinction had managed to create something so ingenious. He was amazed, yet also disappointed. Such a weapon could only function in a place where the great Tao was incomplete. Outside this land, it would be nothing more than useless scrap metal. But what truly angered him was the audacity of these insignificant mortals daring to attack immortals. The faint guilt he once felt vanished completely. With an intolerable expression, Kohong coldly questioned whether these mortals were simply seeking death. Without another word, he invoked his Tao art. Flame Dragon's roar. A massive fire dragon formed in the sky, its body blazing as it surged forward. It swept through the manor and across the city, leaving utter devastation in its wake. In mere moments, the city began to resemble the ruins Lin had witnessed in his previous life. Yet this time, something was wrong. Kohong froze in shock. The flame dragon dragon's roar was fundamentally something no mortal could withstand, yet almost all of Lefon's soldiers were still alive. At that moment, Dao Xuanzi noticed something alarming. The soldiers' weapons were soaked in mortal blood, and Kohong himself had been tainted by the immortal mortal miasma. His Dao arts were weakened. Only then did they realize the truth. They had walked straight into a carefully prepared ambush. This land was bizarre and dangerous. Dawanzi immediately suggested retreating, but before they could leave, a chilling voice echoed through the night, threatening that if they fled, the news of them obtaining a core formation method would spread throughout the entire cultivation world. The next moment, panic set in. Only the two of them knew about that secret. Who had leaked it? Before they could react, several cannonballs condensed with immortal mortal miasma were fired straight at them. Furious, Kohong roared and unleashed massive flames to intercept them. Dao Xuanzi sensed the danger and shouted for him to dodge, but it was already too late. Kohong's flames detonated the cannonballs instead, releasing vast clouds of immortal mortal miasma. The night sky above the ruined city turned blood red as the deadly substance rained down. Amid the wreckage, the two cultivators stood surrounded by dozens of armed soldiers. A soldier stepped forward, announcing that their grand tutor had ordered their lives to be spared if they surrendered. Dawanzi scoffed, but before he could retaliate, he saw Kohong's storage ring floating before him. Understanding dawned instantly. With horror in his eyes, Dawanzi turned to his brother, only to hear Kohong calmly urging him to take the ring and leave. The next moment, Kohong died. A massive golden dragon burst from his body, soaring into the night sky above the burning city. The dragon's spirit transformed into a floating tree branch as a declaration echoed through the heavens. The Foundation establishment cultivator Kohong, who cultivated for 205 years using the mystical object Cho Dragon Branch, had perished in the land of immortal extinction. Besieged by mortals and fatally injured by immortal mortal miasma, his cultivation was destroyed, his lifespan exhausted. His body perished, and his Tao returned to the heavens. A soldier spoke again, stating that the Grand Tutor had no intention of killing Dawanzi. If he ceased resisting, his life would be guaranteed. Nearby, Lefen watched everything with a cold, detached gaze. He vaguely heard a strange voice from the sky at the moment of Kohong's death, but it no longer mattered. Capturing both immortals in this life was clearly impossible. Even Li Fan had not expected the immortal mortal miasma to be this lethal. Dawanzi rose to his feet and calmly declared that he knew nothing of their identities or intentions. His brother had been plotted against, their Tao destroyed. This humiliation was unacceptable. The puppeteer hiding behind these mortals and daring to use immortal mortal miasma, a substance despised by all cultivators, had crossed a line. Rage burned in Dawanzi's eyes as he reminded everyone that they had already witnessed his brother's Tao foundation. Now he would show them his. Ascending into the sky, Dawanzi spread his hands and spoke with a chilling calm. With the wonders of heaven and earth, I build my Tao foundation, a sword named Daosin. The sky trembled. A colossal sword, as large as a mountain, descended from the heavens and crashed into what remained of Shenjing. Destruction became unavoidable. In that instant, Lin activated Hanjin's power and returned to the virtual simulation space. Clutching his chest, he felt the terror of a cultivator at the peak of Foundation establishment. Without immortal mortal miasma, even 100 reincarnations and endless schemes would not have been enough to threaten Dawanzi or Kohong. Lin finally understood their bond as brothers was real. In death, Kohong entrusted everything to Dawanzi, and Dawanzi, unable to accept his brother's end, chose mutual destruction. This only deepened Lin's curiosity about the cultivation world beyond. No matter how dangerous the path ahead was, he would not waver. In the 35th anchor year of his new life, Lin ventured into the endless ruinous abyss. As expected, the dense fog dispersed once every 15 years. When the fog erupted skyward like a reversed waterfall and finally cleared, Lin gazed through his telescope. What he saw changed. Ruins appeared, along with an inscription. The path to immortality is dead. Lin stood frozen, shocked and puzzled, wondering what had happened to the world of cultivation itself. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 4, soon, the scene shifts to Lin's 50th birthday. In the 15th anchor year, history repeats itself. Kohong once again roars furiously at Dawanzi, reciting the exact same words he had spoken in the previous lives. The echo of fate feels suffocating, but this time something is different. Below them, Lefon's soldiers raise their rifles, and they fire relentlessly. Yet their target is not both cultivators, only Kohong. The bullets tear through the air. Kohong reacts instantly, blocking them mid-flight, but his expression twists in confusion. What? His brows knit together. Why? Only me? Then realization strikes. The bullets are coated, immortal mortal miasma. Kohong's pupils shrink. He turns sharply toward Dawanzi, fury blazing in his eyes. So this is how it is, he roars. 100 years of brotherhood, and this is your answer? But Dawanzi is frozen. What are you talking about? His voice cracks, not with guilt, but shock. These mortals are not under my command. He looks down, then back at Kohong, panic rising. They're not mine, and that miasma. This is wrong. We need to leave now. Before either can move, a voice booms from below. Lifan, Immortal Master Dawanzi, he shouts coldly. Why are you going back on your promise? Kohong's heart sinks. Lean's voice follows, calm, almost amused. As agreed, Lean says, you would help Dao Dawanzi eliminate Kohong and seize the core formation method. In return, I would lead my clan out of the immortal Forsaken land. Silence. Dead silence. Kohong slowly turns. His voice trembles, not with fear but betrayal. Tell me, Dawanzi, he growls. Do you still insist on your innocence? Only the two of us knew about the core formation method. Dawanzi's patience snaps. Enough. His eyes harden. I will find the one pulling the strings. Lean keeps talking, deliberately fanning the flames. We have already angered the masses by using the immortal mortal miasma, Lafan adds. If you abandon us now, Immortal Master, my clan will die without even a burial place. The guilt-tripping disgusts Dawanzi. His killing intent erupts. He charges downward like a falling star. Shut your filthy mouth. Boom! The ground explodes as Dawanzi lands. Dust, rubble, shockwaves. His gaze locks onto a strange object nearby. A radio. An artifact? At the same time, Lafan shouts in feigned panic. He's trying to silence us forever. Dawanzi snarls, realizing too late how cautious his enemies are. He obliterates the device in one strike, but the damage is already done. Above, Kohong is shaking with rage. So it's true. His voice cracks. You betrayed me for greed. If you wanted the method, he screams, why not challenge me openly? Why resort to such filth? His aura erupts. I won't flee anymore. He points straight at Dawanzi. Come, if you have the ability, face me. Flame Dragon's wrath. A colossal dragon of fire erupts into the sky, roaring as it charges. Dawanzi exhales slowly. So this is how it ends. He raises his sword. Fire and steel collide. Boom! The night sky trembles. Then another broadcast echoes. Lean's voice again. I've changed my decision. Calm. Calculated. Dawanzi is fickle and vindictive. If he wins, none of us will survive. I hereby order my soldiers, assist Immortal Master Kohong. Kohong bursts into laughter. So this is the noble Dawanzi? He sneers. Abandoned by mortals, betrayed by fate. He who commits too many injustices destroys himself. Dawanzi finally loses control. You blind fool, he roars. But Kohong no longer listens. This is perfect, he declares. I've just mastered a new Dao technique. Imprisoning dragon. A flaming cage snaps shut around Dawanzi. Enraged, Dawanzi expands his sword. Crack! The prison shatters. Enough defense act. He raises his arms to the heavens. Witness my Dao foundation. The colossal sword Daosin descends from the sky. But Kohong answers. Then face mine. A golden dragon erupts. Dao dragon staff. Before they can clash, explosions. Immortal mortal miasma floods the battlefield. Lean soldiers strike. Dawanzi screams. His Dao foundation corrupted. The dragon branch within him grows uncontrollably. Roots tear through flesh. Branches pierce bone until nothing remains. A corpse. A voice echoes from the heavens. Foundation establishment cultivator Dawanzi, cultivated for 201 years. Dao foundation, rusted sword Daosin, perished. Lafan exhales sharply. The same voice. Again, he approaches Kohong. I greet Immortal Master, Lean says respectfully. Please spare the 1,000 lives of my clan. Kohong studies him. So it was you, the voice from all directions. Why would a mortal dare interfere in a battle of immortals? Lean bows deeply. Because if Dawanzi won, we were already dead. Kohong sighs. You mortals truly don't understand, he explains. Leaving this land is deadly, even for cultivators. Taking mortals along? Impossible. Lean freezes. So you didn't know either? Kohong nods casually. No. Desperation creeps into Lean's voice. What about our descendants? If they cultivate? Kohong laughs. There is no spiritual energy here. Mortals are soaked in miasma. They can see the Dao, but never touch it. The verdict is final. There is no way out. Lean stands, bows, and leaves. The door closes. Then immortal mortal miasma floods the shelter. Kohong screams. Realization hits. Outside, Lefan listens. Expression cold. If immortals and mortals cannot coexist, then how could I ever trust an immortal's words? And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 5, according to the intelligence obtained from Kohong, the land of immortal extinction was never meant to exist. It was an immortal forsaken land, born from a catastrophe that shook the ancient cultivation world thousands of years ago. Back then, an unknown plague appeared among mortals. At first, no cultivator cared. Why would they? Mortals were insignificant, fragile, disposable. But everything changed the moment the first cultivator became infected. The plague evolved. Its medium of transmission was none other than spiritual energy itself, the very lifeline cultivators depended on to survive. Like wildfire carried by the heavens and earth, it spread across the entire cultivation world. For those infected, a mild case meant their cultivation regressed, their realm collapsing. A severe case meant losing everything overnight, becoming no different from a mortal. Then their bodies would perish. Their Tao would vanish, returning to the heavens. Driven mad by fear and desperation, cultivators turned their fury toward the supposed source, the mortals. A large-scale slaughter began. Cities burned, blood flowed, entire bloodlines were erased, but it didn't work. The plague didn't disappear. Instead, freed from restraint, it spread even faster through the spiritual veins of heaven and earth, claiming even more cultivators. Waiting for death was never the cultivators' way. Some began researching ways to resist the plague. Others proposed a solution so cruel it would stain history forever. The Great Migration Plan. All mortals would be banished, exiled to lesser worlds, shattered grotto heavens devoid of spiritual energy. Formations would seal these worlds permanently. No return, no redemption. And thus, the immortal Forsaken Lands were born. Over time, even cultivators gave birth to mortal descendants. Within them lingered a shadow of the plague. That shadow became the line between immortals and mortals. It was named Immortal Mortal Miasma. After reading everything, Lean realized something terrifying. He didn't even know how many immortal Forsaken lands existed, and the number of cultivators willing to risk entering them was almost zero. To encounter 2 cultivators in one lifetime was already miraculous, but miracles meant nothing to a mortal with limited time. Lean was 70 years old. His biological lifespan ended at 86, 16 years. That was all he had left. A chilling thought seized him. Was he doomed to repeat mortal lives again and again, trapped forever within the cage of mortality? For a brief moment, despair almost swallowed him, but then, no. After waiting nearly 300 years, how could he give up now? Lean went to see the captured Kohong. How did mortals arrive here during the Great Migration? Kohong was genuinely stunned. You still haven't given up, so what if he escaped? At 70, he still wanted to cultivate immortality? Lean leaned closer, his voice calm but sharp. Your cultivation base is gone. Right now, you're no different from us. And if you return to the cultivation world, you might recover. He proposed a deal. Help him find a path back to the cultivation world, and he would take Kohong with him. Kohong sneered. Treacherous villain, trying to trick him again. But Lean didn't argue. Truth or lie, it's still hope. Are you willing to rot here and die? Silence. Then a helpless sigh. Kohong explained. In ancient times, mortals were transported using flying arcs and shuttles, transport-type Dharma artifacts. Back then, sex flourished. The world was prosperous, but a great calamity struck. Cultivators scattered. Those artifacts vanished. When Lean asked about the calamity, Kohong shook his head. The plague alone wasn't enough to destroy the cultivation world. The real reason, there can only be one golden core Tao. Methods could not be cultivated by more than one person. When too many practiced the same technique, cultivation efficiency collapsed. Masters turned on disciples. Brothers became enemies. The cultivation world drowned in blood. Lean remembered the endless abyss. Everything began to connect. So how did cultivators cultivate now? Kohong sighed. 2 paths. The Myriad Immortals Alliance, missions, contributions, incomplete methods, or the 5 Elders Council, loyalty contracts, and lifelong service. Methods weren't scarce, but all were incomplete. To advance, one must constantly switch techniques. Lean frowned. Wouldn't that waste everything? Kohong explained the supreme primordial true scripture fragment, a method allowing one to disperse cultivation without loss. Lean was shaken. It was too convenient, too perfect. Kohong sighed again. What choice do we have? Only then did he reveal the truth. Dawanzi didn't flee just for a core formation method. It was a true nascent soul method, a path that didn't need to be abandoned. Later, Kohong mentioned rumors, mortals secretly returning to the cultivation world, baseless gossip, or hope. Lean wouldn't let go. If there was even a sliver of possibility, he would pursue it. He promised Kohong everything. Freedom, return, all belongings, even the nascent soul true method. Kohong was stunned. After confirmation, he agreed. For 16 years, Lean searched. Ancient records, tombs, ruins, suppressing dissent, ignoring resentment, but time was merciless. 16 years later, nothing. Lean stood at the end of his life, his body fragile, like a candle in the wind. Before this life ended, he opened Kohong's storage ring, the Jade Cosmos Golden Chapter Scroll, a nascent soul method, 0 cultivators, a mountain of treasure, no way to use it. Then, something impossible happened. The Hunjin system reacted. Item detected, rusted sword din, status damaged. Classification rechargeable item. The system asked, proceed with recharge, and that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 6, the moment Lean chose yes, there was no turning back. The anchor charge began. 1 anchor point active. According to Hunjin's feedback, truth returning, once the charge reached 100%, a second anchor point would be unlocked. From that point onward, reality itself would become something that could be restarted, rewritten, and revisited. He would no longer be bound to a single beginning. If that second anchor truly existed, then time would finally stop being his enemy. The cultivation world was vast beyond imagination. Wondrous items were rare, but rarity meant nothing in a boundless world. As long as he could leave the immortal Forsaken land, mortality would no longer be his cage. Lean closed the storage ring. Aside from a few standard spirit stones, there was nothing else worth mentioning. With a faint reluctance, one that only someone who had lived too many lives could feel, he activated Hanjin and ended the simulation. Reality dissolved. The virtual simulation space welcomed him back in silence. The system presented the familiar 4 options. This time, his choice was different. He chose to retain an item. The contents of the storage ring unfolded before him. Lean sighed. He couldn't take everything. After a brief hesitation, he selected the nascent soul cultivation method. Then something went wrong, or perhaps something finally went right. The method bound itself directly to his system, permanent, unremovable, etched into truth, returning itself. Lean froze. Then slowly, a smile crept onto his face. Not joy, not relief, but calculation. This single change shattered countless limitations. In his previous life, ordering the excavation of ancient tombs had shaken the entire empire. Even with absolute authority, the resistance was immense. But next time, if he began earlier, if he shaped beliefs instead of forcing obedience, then even the world could be taught to dig its own grave for truth. Time moved on. Lean's 6th life began, and the world changed quietly. In the 5th anchor year, an ancient ancient seeking school appeared from nowhere. It brought ancient texts to the capital, texts so refined, so complete, that the court trembled. Change in virtue, southern flower, the analects, the great learning, spread faster than arbor could. In the 6th anchor year, the emperor fell gravely ill. Physicians failed. At death's edge, the ancient seeking school presented an elixir. The emperor survived. Faith was born. In the 11th anchor year, a massive tomb robbing case surfaced. Over 100 were arrested. Prefect Li Fan dared not act alone and sent a memorial by 800 Lai Express. A month later, the decree arrived. Not death, enslavement. Sent to the capital. The machine was turning. In the 15th anchor year, the emperor fell ill again. This time he sought immortality. 100,000 troops were dispatched to excavate ancient tombs across the land. No pill was found. The emperor died with regret. But before death, he abdicated. And once more, Lin stood behind the throne. In the 23rd anchor year, fragments of a forgotten dynasty surfaced. The Qi dynasty. Lin issued a bounty. Whoever found its tomb would be ennobled. In the 25th anchor year, it was found. The tomb of the first emperor of Qi. When Lin entered the main burial chamber, even he fell silent. A ceiling of stars, mountains rising from seas of cloud, paths suspended in emptiness. This wasn't craftsmanship. This was defiance. At the highest peak stood a thatched hut, woven from golden threads. Inside, not an emperor, but an outer disciple, Aing, outer disciple of the Taihang sect, exiled, forgotten, buried as a nobody, yet entrusted with overseeing the Great Migration. Lin felt something cold crawl up his spine. If sects perished before the migration, then someone survived longer than history admitted. Excavations continued. Days later, bad news. A record mentioning flying ark. The attendant tomb had been robbed 1,000 years ago. Something snapped. Lin lost control. The table shattered. Hope again was just a reflection in water. He issued another bounty. Bigger. Desperate. Then, in the 35th anchor year, an immortal tomb was found, protected by an invisible barrier. Veterans couldn't touch it. Lin didn't hesitate. He ordered the use of immortal, mortal miasma. Buckets were poured. The barrier shattered. Inside, among the burial goods, an ark. A real one. A flying ark. Lin stood there staring at it, breathing slowly. For the first time in countless lifetimes, hope did not disappear. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 7, the moment Lin's eyes fell upon the object, his breath unconsciously stalled. It was small. Far too small. A plain wooden boat lay quietly before him, its surface worn smooth by time. No divine radiance. No overwhelming pressure. No awe-inspiring presence. Lin couldn't help but wonder, was this really the flying ark he had chased across centuries of reincarnation and despair? Doubt gnawed at him until his gaze shifted to the tomb wall. There, etched deep into stone by a trembling hand, were the final words of its owner. Words carved not for glory, but for resignation. Only then did the truth slowly unravel. The tomb's owner was named Shen Hong, a cultivator at the Foundation establishment stage. Over 3,000 years ago, he had been hunted relentlessly by powerful enemies. With nowhere left to flee, he crossed into the immortal Forsaken Land, mistaking exile for refuge. But the immortal Forsaken Land was a grave disguised as a sanctuary. Spiritual energy was non-existent. Spirit stones were scarce, and Shen Hong had brought too few. As the days passed, his reserves dwindled. His cultivation eroded bit by bit. Power, once firmly in his grasp, slipped away like sand through his fingers. Facing the slow certainty of death, Shen Hong clung to a desperate hypothesis that when mortals were once exiled here, remnants of the cultivation world might have followed, perhaps even a flying ark. Decades were spent searching. At last, he found the tomb of Aing. Hope bloomed, only to be crushed. The flying ark was real, but its core spell formation had already been destroyed. Worse still, Shen Hong lacked even the most basic knowledge of artifact refinement. The path forward ended there. That was the moment he gave up. Before death claimed him, Shen Hong carved his final message into the tomb wall. He left behind a simple offer to whoever arrived after him. Sweep my grave, and you may take one item from the cultivation world as payment. Protected by layers of spell formations, Shen Hong was certain only a cultivator could ever reach this place. And he was right. At that very moment, the Hanjin system's cold voice echoed within Lin's mind, announcing the discovery of a wondrous item of heaven and earth, a halting stellar fragment. Lin's heart surged, yet reality was cruel. The truth returning system showed no reaction. The fragment had already lost its divinity, likely damaged when Lin forcefully breached the tomb using vast quantities of immortal mortal miasma. What remained was nothing more than an ordinary stone. Lin exhaled slowly. Disappointment had long ceased to surprise him. Turning his attention elsewhere, he discovered two cultivation methods, a lesser truth returning vastness, Qi condensation method, and a cloud water record, Foundation establishment method. Each already had one cultivator. Lin frowned. 3,000 years had passed. Anyone who once practiced them should have turned to dust. Then realization struck. Master copies. After the Great Calamity, countless techniques were preserved, recycled, and redistributed by dominant powers. These methods had likely passed through countless hands, abandoned again and again. Lin let out a bitter chuckle. Even cultivation rots with time. Then his hand stopped. The third item, the Taihang Arc. After thousands of years, after endless simulations, after lifetimes of failure, it was finally his. Damaged or not, Lin felt an overwhelming satisfaction ripple through his being. Shen Hong Hong couldn't repair it. Lin couldn't either, but he knew someone who could. Time shifted. The world turned once more. In Lin's 50th anchor year, fate replayed a familiar scene. Before Ko Hong and Dawanzi could finish their heated exchange, Lin interrupted calmly, asking whether a mere core formation method was truly worth dying for. The two cultivators turned sharply, astonished that a mortal dared speak so casually. Lin stepped forward and invited them down for a conversation. Reluctantly, they complied. With a faint smile, Lin spoke of an ancient prophecy passed down through his bloodline, foretelling that two cultivators would one day arrive from the east of the abyssal ruins, bringing with them the chance to escape the immortal Forsaken Land. Doubt surfaced. Curiosity followed. When Lin mentioned the Tian sect, shock rippled through them, a sect once famed for deduction beyond comprehension. Lin revealed the truth. His ancestor had belonged to it, not as a cultivator obsessed with power, but as a man consumed by calculation and foresight. When the great cataclysm struck, he chose to remain behind with his family, sacrificing freedom for blood. The reason Lin intervened was simple. These two were the ones foretold. Yet seeing them ready to slaughter each other over scraps disgusted him. When Lin revealed the existence of a cultivation method leading directly to the Golden Core realm, both cultivators were shaken to the core. But what he truly sought was not power. It was return. Return to the Taihang sect and the repair of the Taihang arc. The prophecy was clear. One master of swordsmanship, one master of artifact refinement. Together, they were the key. Dawanzi agreed. Ko Hong did not. Though he nodded outwardly, greed coiled tightly in his heart. When Dawanzi later confirmed the existence of the nascent soul method, Ko Hong's expression darkened completely. In silence, a vow formed. If persuasion failed, then force would suffice. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 8, the instant Ko Hong suggested seizing the cultivation method by force, Dawanzi's expression darkened. He refused, without hesitation. In a low voice, he reminded his companion of a truth Ko Hong seemed eager to forget. Lin was a mortal, yes, but he was a descendant of the Tian sect, and the art of deduction cultivated by that ancient sect was not something to be taken lightly. If they acted recklessly, there was no telling what unseen contingencies Lin had already prepared. More importantly, repairing the Taihang arc posed no real difficulty. There was no need to invite disaster for something that could be gained peacefully. Dawanzi also saw further than Ko Hong. If Lin were truly pushed to desperation, he might reveal the cultivation method's true nature, a nascent soul technique. Such a revelation would not bring fortune, but calamity. Once exposed, it would draw predators from every corner of the cultivation world. That risk was unacceptable. The matter was settled. The following day, Lin personally handed over the Taihang arc. Ko Hong examined it with reverence. The craftsmanship alone left him breathless. The refinement techniques, the interlocking spell formations, everything bore the unmistakable signature of the Taihang sect. Compared to this, everything Ko Hong had studied before felt crude and shallow. Repairing this artifact would not merely restore it, it would elevate his own understanding of artifact refinement. Lin gave them complete freedom. Whatever materials they required, he would supply. Cultivation knew no concept of time. What appeared to be a humble wooden vessel consumed nearly an entire year of their lives. When Lin finally received word that the repairs were complete, he rushed to them at once. Ko Hong explained carefully. The core power formation had been fully restored. The sizing formation, dust cleansing array, and auxiliary systems were operational once more. However, due to material constraints, the offensive and defensive formations could only be partially repaired. The arc could pierce the great immortal severing formation, but it would not withstand direct confrontation with a cultivator. Lin was unconcerned. That was enough. As long as he could leave this forsaken land and return with his ancestors' relic, the rest could be settled later. Ko Hong then described the arc's capabilities. It was fueled by spirit energy and controlled via divine sense. It could shift between three forms: compact, medium, and fully expanded. Even with limited spirit stones, the stored energy would be sufficient for Lin to depart using the second form. Smiling, Ko Hong asked whether Lin, being a mortal, required a pilot. Before the words finished leaving his mouth, the wooden boat transformed. In an instant, it reshaped itself into a miniature flying vessel. Ko Hong froze. His shock was undisguised. For a mortal to control a Taihang artifact without cultivation, such methods bordered on the absurd. Lin laughed softly. A trivial trick, he said lightly. He thanked them sincerely. After being trapped for over 1,000 years, hope had finally taken shape. Dawanzi then asked about the promised cultivation method. Lin merely smiled and gestured for them to follow. Everything had long been prepared. 3 days later, Ko Hong and Dawanzi came to bid farewell. Their spirit stones were nearly depleted. Remaining any longer would risk regression in their cultivation. Before departing, Ko Hong handed Lin a carefully drawn map depicting the terrain beyond the Great Immortal Severing Formation. With no jade slips available, he had used brush and paper instead. Lin accepted it solemnly. Moments later, the two cultivators vanished into streaks of light. As they traveled, Ko Hong sighed. Lin, he said, possessed rare character, a true figure among mortals. Yet his limit was near. Even if he returned to the cultivation world, his remaining lifespan would be short. Dawanzi responded quietly. Without longevity, he said, all achievements are illusions. They had once fought to the death for that very reason. When Ko Hong asked which method Lean had given him, Dawanzi smiled faintly. It was not the same one Kohong had received. Once he returned and entered closed-door cultivation, he would break through to Golden Core and fulfill the promises he had made. They disappeared deeper into the abyss. Aboard the Taihang Ark, Lean stood alone, gazing into the endless silver fog. 14 years remained before the mist would naturally disperse. By then, he would be 85, his great limit. Smiling faintly, he whispered that there was nothing left in this life worth clinging to. And so, he chose to test fate. The Taihang Ark plunged into the abyss. The silver fog thickened, space distorted. Suddenly, the vessel shook violently as if colliding with an invisible wall. Astral winds. Even a Foundation establishment cultivator would struggle to survive here. Wind blades screamed past the hull. Without the Ark's defensive formation, death would have been instantaneous. After a long half hour, the turbulence eased. Light emerged. He had broken through. Lean had escaped the great immortal severing formation. What followed was ascension upon ascension, core formation, enlightenment, immortality, divinity, realms stacked upon realms, power layered upon power, until he opened his eyes, back in his mortal body, seated within the Taihang Ark. It had been an illusion, the illusory light layer. The Ark had awakened him by navigating out on its own. Understanding dawned. Trusting the vessel, Lean allowed it to guide him, layer after layer past fire, ice, thunder, until the final region, the darkness layer. Then, a colossal presence emerged, a mouth vast enough to swallow worlds. Lean screamed. Truth returning. Activate Hanjin. The simulation ended. Though he failed at the final step, the gains from this life far exceeded expectation. Without hesitation, he retained the Taihang Ark. His seventh life began. This time, prepared. This time, resolute. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of Chapter 9, just then a dazzling golden light erupted from the abyssal ruins. Along with it came something profoundly unsettling. As the radiance faded, familiar words emerged once more. The path of immortality is dead. Lean snapped back to his senses. For a brief moment earlier, countless voices had whispered inside his mind, luring him deeper into the abyss. Had it not been for that golden light piercing through the great immortal severing formation, he would have already been torn apart. 15 years passed. In his 20th anchor year, truth returning finally completed its charge. With renewed confidence, Lean returned to the abyssal ruins once more. He piloted the Taihang Ark smoothly through layer after layer, reaching the thunderstorm layer without major incident. There, he stopped, hovering just above the darkness layer. Suddenly, a violent wind surged. The frenzied thunder weakened, distorted by an unfamiliar force. Specks of faint light emerged from the darkness, and Lean seized this fleeting opportunity to search for the lurking horror. Nothing. The light was fading. He hesitated no longer. The Taihang Ark shot downward at full speed. Then, the monstrous mouth opened again, vast beyond comprehension. This time, Lean was certain. The creature bore overwhelming malice toward mortals. Its purpose was simple: to devour anything human that dared approach the depths. Grinding his teeth, Lean veered upward at the last instant. He escaped death by a hair's breadth, retreating back into the thunderstorm layer. The behemoth halted at the boundary of darkness, unwilling or unable to pursue further. Bathed in lightning's glow, Lean finally saw it clearly. A colossal whale-like entity, so massive that the Taihang Ark was nothing more than a grain of dust before it, and yet it always found him, no matter how vast the darkness. Disheartened, Lean clenched his fists. Fortunately, time was something he had in abundance. Over the next 15 years, he challenged the darkness layer countless times. Each attempt failed faster than the last. The creature's response time shortened, its pursuit more precise. Retreat became inevitable. Then, in his 35th anchor year, Lean noticed something unusual. Only on the day the white mist receded did the whale's reaction slow, delayed as though restrained by something unseen. That was enough. This time, he would gamble everything. At maximum speed, he plunged downward, for longer than ever before. Below him, an illusory brilliance drew closer. Then, that terrible cry echoed once again. The mouth opened. Too late. The simulation ended. Back in the virtual space, Lean abandoned retention and accelerated charging. His psychological age no longer increased. He had reached its limit. 748 years remained. On his 8th lifetime, he returned to Shenhong's tomb and recharged the halting steel fragment. Anchor progress rose to 51%. Not enough, but not nothing. He failed again in his 20th year, and again in his 35th. At least his mastery of the Taihang Ark improved. By his 50th year, he stopped forcing the attempt. Old age dulled his reactions. Instead, he sought answers. Once more, he invited Kohong and Dawanzi under the pretext of a cultivation method. After wine loosened tongues, he revealed a painting of the behemoth. Their expressions changed. Dawanzi recalled ancient records, a long-lost beast-taming sect. Among their controlled horrors, the rift-splitting whale. No method to avoid it survived. Once again, Lean was alone. He ended his 8th life. In his 9th, he drifted. No control, no resistance. The whale did not appear. Confused, Lean allowed the Ark to drift all the way down until the exit was visible. Only then did the whale emerge. Realization struck like lightning. It could not perceive objects moving at constant velocity. Laughing wildly, Lean held course. The whale missed. The Taihang Ark tore through the rift between realms. Space twisted violently. Blood streamed from Lean's eyes, nose, and mouth, but he laughed. Then he saw it. Not one whale. Thousands. Rift-splitting whales carving darkness itself, surrounding the immortal forsaken land from beyond. The truth was far larger than escape. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 10, soon, the Taihang arc burst forth from an abyssal ruin, eerily similar to the ruinous abyss of the immortal Forsaken Land. For a fleeting moment, it traversed the immortal plains. Inside the arc, Lin, already standing at death's threshold, smiled. A smile born not of relief but of fulfillment. He had finally entered the cultivation world. Even if it lasted only an instant, to witness it before dying meant that his ninth life had not been lived in vain. And so, without hesitation, he activated Hanjin, ending the simulation. Lafon was deeply satisfied. 9 lives, nearly 500 long years. At last, he had brushed against the threshold of cultivation. According to his original plan, he was supposed to accelerate the charging progress immediately. Yet, when the list of selectable retention items appeared, his thoughts wavered. The system offered him 4 new options. Then his eyes froze. Among them, the halting steel fragment. Shock rippled through him. After a brief moment of contemplation, Lin made his choice. He decided to retain the halting steel fragment, not for power, but to verify a bold conjecture that had long lingered in his heart. And with that decision, his 10th life began. Since he did not choose to accelerate charging, the Hanjin system would require 20 years to complete its charge. In the 3rd anchor year, Lin arrived outside Shenhong's tomb. This time, he did not use the immortal mortal miasma to force his way inside. Instead, he directly retrieved the halting steel fragment from the Hanjin system. The moment the fragment, brought from a previous life, manifested in the world, a wondrous phenomenon occurred. It began to slowly dissipate, like ice melting beneath a blazing sun. At the same time, the formation inside Shenhong's tomb, generated by its original fragment, visibly strengthened, just as Lin had anticipated. Mystical objects of heaven and earth possess absolute uniqueness. 2 identical mystical objects cannot coexist. Yet, through the power of the Hanjin system, he had forcibly created a duplicate. The consequence was inevitable. The 2 fragments resonated, merged, and ultimately became one. Only then did Lin command his subordinates to deploy the immortal mortal miasma spray and break into the tomb. The process was arduous. The formation's strength had clearly increased, and it took considerable time to wear it down. Once inside Shenhong's tomb, the halting steel fragment appeared largely unchanged, save for being slightly less damaged. Still, the Hanjin system could not absorb it. From the looks of it, the fragment would need further restoration before it could generate new energy for the system to draw upon. Lin stored this strengthened fragment within the Taihang arc, treating it as a vital asset for his future journey into the cultivation world during the 20th anchor year. As the Hanjin system neared full charge, Solifan acted without mercy. He launched a sweeping investigation, purging corrupt officials and powerful landlords alike, confiscating the gold, silver, and jewels their families had hoarded over generations. He understood clearly, even upon entering the cultivation world, he would still have to deal with mortals. And mortals required wealth. Gold, silver, valuables, these had to be prepared in advance. Food was also essential. Yet grain was the foundation of the nation, and his demands were immense. Memorials of opposition flooded the court. Solifan did not argue. Instead, before all civil and military officials, he expanded the Taihang arc to its maximum size, suspending it directly above the imperial palace. The moment the common people witnessed this immortal spectacle, they knelt and kowtowed in fear and reverence. The officials' attitudes changed instantly. They no longer resisted, only complied. With their proactive cooperation and the execution of profiteering merchants, the Taihang arc was eventually stuffed to the brim. Preparations were complete. Lin severed his final ties to the mortal world. Piloting the Taihang arc, he once again ascended into the skies above the ruinous abyss. He calmed his mind and allowed the arc to autopilot at a constant velocity. Only a few hours passed, yet to Lin it felt longer than the hundreds of years he had lived before. The tearing sensation of crossing between worlds surged through him. This time, however, he endured it, adapted to it. After a long wait, he finally passed through the immortal extinction great formation and arrived in the cultivation world. But the moment he saw his surroundings, confusion seized him. This place was entirely different. He could not find any corresponding sea on Kohong's map. For now, he set the question aside. Step by step, that was the only way forward. Concerned about the dwindling spirit stones powering the arc, Lin searched desperately for signs of civilization. He flew across the vast sea, choosing directions at random. 7 days, 7 nights, nothing. After more than 10 additional days, the Taihang arc's speed began to slow, its energy nearly exhausted. Just as despair crept in, a faint silhouette appeared on the distant horizon. A ship. Through his telescope, Lin fell silent. The ship was sinking. A massive hole gaped in its hull, 2/3 already submerged. Dozens of people struggled in the surrounding waters, crew and passengers alike. One passenger shouted, telling the others not to panic. He claimed he had already sent a signal to an immortal master who would soon arrive to save them. Lin's heart skipped. A plan formed instantly. He recalled the Taihang arc, leapt into the sea, and quietly swam toward them. Blending into the crowd, he pretended to be barely clinging to life. Soon, the immortal master arrived. Hovering above the sea, his figure blurred as though shrouded behind gauze. His face and clothes were impossible to discern. Lin joined the crowd, pleading to be saved. The noise became unbearable. With a thought, silence fell. Lin realized he could no longer make a sound. With a casual flick of a finger, the sinking sinking ship rose from the water, its shattered hull repairing itself in an instant. A wave of the Immortal's hand followed. Everyone, including Lean, was hurled back onto the deck. The Immortal Master then demanded to know who had sent the signal. A man named Such Chongyu stepped forward, bowing deeply and addressing himself as a lowly one. The Immortal Master asked if he understood the rules. Once they arrived, whatever happened would have nothing to do with him. He had never seen them. He knew none of them. Such Chongyu respectfully agreed. The Immortal Master said nothing more. With another wave of his hand, the ship shot forward at astonishing speed. Lean was awestruck. He could not discern the technique used, nor did the Hanjin system register anything. The Immortal Master stood silently at the bow. The ship sailed on. Half a day passed. After night fell, flickering lights appeared ahead. An island, prosperous and grand. Hundreds of ships filled its harbor, yet their vessel bypassed it entirely, circling to a desolate rear shore. Entering a narrow waterway, the ship slipped into a natural karst cave. After navigating the darkness, it finally stopped. Once stabilized, several burly men, dressed in black, boarded the ship. They ignored the Immortal Master completely. Forcing everyone to disembark, they led them into a vast hall and announced that they would rest there for the night. Food was plentiful. They could eat freely. Then the men left. Among the crowd, a young man cursed their misfortune, lamenting the sea monster attack that had killed more than half of them. Another complained that his father had insisted on sending him here to cultivate. How could cultivation compare to music and pleasure? He even boasted that he was the son of the Prince of Janan. What riches couldn't he enjoy back home? What good was this god-forsaken place? Such Chongyu interrupted them sharply. What was the point of complaining now? Every family present had paid an enormous price to send them here. If cultivation succeeded, not only could they gain longevity, but they might one day return home, freeing their families from mortal shackles. Only then did Lean fully understand. They were all like him, mortals exiled from lands of immortal extinction. The difference was, in their lands, the cultivation world was no secret. A mature smuggling route already existed. At that moment, someone clapped Lean on the shoulder. The sudden contact startled him. The burly man asked what official post Lean had held in Dali, remarking that his face was unfamiliar. Or perhaps he was a wealthy merchant from one of the provinces. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 11, suddenly Lean's expression darkened. The very instant he turned toward the big man, he slapped the man's hand away with ruthless precision. A dull crack echoed as bones bruised beneath the force. The fatty staggered back, face draining of color, retreating like a terrified chicken. It wasn't the pain that frightened him most, it was the aura. A bone-chilling presence rolled off Lean like an invisible tide. Just one glance had nearly scared him out of his wits. In that brief moment, the fatty felt as though he were standing before someone who had occupied a position of absolute authority for many years. And he was right. Lean was no simple character. The next day, at dawn, a middle-aged man entered the spacious hall and announced that they would soon be taken to complete their household registrations. Once registered, they would officially become residents of Lioli Island. But there was a condition. They were not to say anything they shouldn't. Otherwise, their safety could not be guaranteed. The man continued calmly, explaining that they were to identify themselves as residents of Western Do Island, whose homeland had been destroyed by a devastating windstorm. That was why they had fled to Lioli Island as refugees. Afterward, he told them they were free to ask questions. No one dared to speak. Seeing the silence, the middle-aged man ordered everyone to change into tattered clothing. Then, under his lead, and under the watchful eyes of 4 or 5 men dressed in black, they were guided through a hidden passage out of the karst cave and onto the surface. Their group numbered several dozen. It wasn't small. Yet as they passed through the island, most residents merely cast them a casual glance before losing interest altogether. Clearly, scenes like this were nothing new. They wound through the residential districts for who knew how long before finally stopping in front of a manor. Not long after, a young servant at the gate went inside to announce their arrival, then returned and led them through a side door on the left into a large hall. Inside, 2 or 3 other groups, over 100 people in total, were already gathered. Soon, it was their turn. The middle-aged man, Sun Jiang, respectfully greeted Stuart Xiao, one of the island lord's aides overseeing the registration. Stuart Xiao calmly asked whether the group Sun Jiang had brought were all refugees to be registered. After receiving confirmation, he asked another question. Were they wealthy or of noble background? Sun Jiang smiled faintly and withdrew an item from the breast pocket of his robe. He replied that they were all from wealthy families on Dao Island. He presented the treasure and sighed, adding that it was unfortunate their wealth and glory had vanished like bubbles when disaster struck. Without the protection of an immortal master, nothing endured. Now, they had no choice but to travel thousands of miles to seek refuge on Lioli Island. He added that a windstorm had raged just days earlier. Even Lioli Island had been affected, but the western islands had suffered far worse. Over 200 islands had been erased, countless mortals lost at sea. Fortunately, the immortal masters had shown mercy and ordered the rescue of refugees. Stuart Xiao nodded. He praised Sun Jiang's Tion Balu for their dedication and assured him that he would report everything truthfully to the island lord. When rewards from the immortal masters were distributed, Sun Jiang would surely receive his his share. Then, Stuart Xiao began processing the registrations. Before long, it was Lin's turn. When Stuart Xiao raised his head and saw Lin's calm posture and composed demeanor, he instinctively sensed the bearing of an important figure. Suppressing his surprise, he asked Lin for his name. After Lin replied, Stuart Xiao inscribed it onto a blank paper talisman and handed it over, instructing him to place a drop of blood on it. Lin bit his thumb and complied. Stuart Xiao explained that this spirit talisman would serve as Lin's proof of identity. From that moment on, it would be required for everything on the island: work assignments, grain distribution, inspections, and more. He warned him solemnly never to lose it. As Stuart Xiao spoke at length, Sun Jiang, standing beside him, was puzzled. He couldn't understand why an aide of the island lord was being so meticulous and courteous toward Lin. Still, the process moved swiftly. Soon, everyone had received their Lioli Island household registrations. They did not return to the karst cave. Instead, Sun Jiang led them into the courtyard of a residence. Smiling with satisfaction, he announced that since the registrations were complete, they could now sign the contract. Without hesitation, Such Chongyu stepped forward. He calmly took out a paper talisman, bit his finger, and smeared his blood onto it. The talisman, bearing his name, instantly dissipated into thin air. This was the so-called second of the 3 contracts. Once they were fully settled, Such Chongyu vowed to sign the final one as promised. Sun Jiang rubbed his forehead, clearly displeased. He muttered that dealing with people from the departed realm was always troublesome. If not for the immortal master's orders, their Tion Balu would never engage in such an unprofitable affair. Then he announced the benefits. All residents of Lioli Island could claim housing using their household registration talisman. Additionally, during their first year, they would receive a fixed amount of grain every month free of charge. Although this information was important, Such Chongyu was more concerned about cultivation. What must they do if they wish to cultivate? Sun Jiang answered honestly. Mortals returning from the land of exile carried far more miasma in their bodies than ordinary people. If they wished to cultivate, they must first expel it. That much they already knew. The real question was how. Sun Jiang explained there were several methods. The first was the island's body-purifying spirit pool. Soaking in it for a full day and night could completely remove all miasma. However, the materials required to open the spirit pool were astonishingly expensive. Even wealthy Lioli Island could only open it once every 3 years. He added, as if in thought, that the last opening had been a year ago, meaning they would need to wait 2 more years. Worse still, the number of available spots was extremely limited, and competition was fierce. Outsiders like them, with no foundation, stood little chance. Such Chongyu asked about the other methods. Sun Jiang continued. The second method was to cultivate the profound yellow heart cleansing incantation, paired with specific medicines and a controlled diet. Over time, 5 to 6 years, it would gradually alter their constitution and purge the miasma completely. It was slow, but stable, and it didn't require any extraordinary price. Both the incantation and its elixirs could be purchased at the island's pharmacies. Such Chongyu frowned deeply. 5 or 6 years was no small span. He asked if those were the only 2 methods. At that moment, Sun Jiang's expression darkened. There was a third method, he said, to become a test subject. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 12, as Sun Jiang reiterated what they had just heard, the entire group was shaken to the core. He confirmed his earlier words without hesitation. Some immortal masters were deeply interested in the miasma lingering within mortal bodies. Every year, volunteers were selected from among the mortals on the island to serve as test subjects. Using special methods, the immortal masters would extract the miasma from their bodies for research. The process was fast. Only a few months were needed to completely drain the miasma, but the price was unbearable. The pain was so intense that it left one trap between life and death, unable to live, unable to die. Most people couldn't endure until the process was complete. Their minds shattered long before their bodies were purified, leaving them irreversibly insane. Once again, Such Chongyu asked if there truly was no other way. Sun Jiang hesitated, then spoke with visible skepticism. It was said that the direct mortal descendants of immortal masters could use heavenly materials and earthly treasures to reconstruct their bodies. Not only would such individuals no longer suffer from miasma, but their cultivation aptitude would also be greatly enhanced. However, such methods were utterly beyond imagination. Even the island lord of Lioli Island had never received such treatment. Sun Jiang finally declared that this was all he knew. If they truly wished to cultivate, they should think carefully over the coming days. He understood them well. They had all returned from the land of exile after enduring unspeakable hardships. A heart yearning for the Tao was only natural. After all, who on this island hadn't once been like them? But the path of immortality was cruel beyond words. Even if one managed to purge all the miasma, only a rare few could actually sense the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, let alone guide it into their bodies. So why seek suffering? There was nothing wrong with remaining mortal. Rather than desperately chasing immortality, it was better to enjoy life, indulge in its pleasures, and live in the present. Such Chongyu remained silent, his fist clenched tightly. From his expression expression alone, it was clear he had no intention of giving up. After Sunjang left, the crowd gradually dispersed. Lin asked around and found the place where free housing could be claimed. Presenting his spirit talisman, he was led by a guide to the residential area in the northern part of Lioli Island. Countless houses were densely packed together. Most had only a single room. Still, each had a small courtyard enclosed by walls, giving them a sense of privacy that made them bearable. After handing Lin the key, the guide left. The room itself was simple, just a bed, a few tables, and some chairs. Nothing more. But at least he had settled down without difficulty, and all of it was thanks to those people from the departed realm. Unfortunately, aside from Such Chongyu, the rest of that group was painfully mediocre. They had no real heart for the Tao, no resolve strong enough to achieve anything meaningful. Lin didn't dwell on them. His priority now was clear, removing the miasma from his body. The spirit pool immediately came to mind. Although spots for the body-purifying spirit pool were extremely precious, the treasures stored within the Taihang Arc were countless. Forcing his way into a spot wouldn't be difficult, but it was too conspicuous. One should never flaunt wealth. Lin had no foundation on Lioli Island yet. Revealing too much too soon would only invite unwanted attention. This matter required careful planning. Just then, someone knocked on his door. When Lin asked who it was, the reply came as a whisper, vague and evasive. His eyes darkened. Lin silently drew a sword from the miniature Taihang Arc and moved toward the door. Opening it slightly, he was met with an unwelcome sight. It was the fatty. Without invitation, the man barged inside, accusing Lin outright. He was certain Lin wasn't one of them, wasn't from the departed realm. Frowning deeply, he demanded to know who Lin really was and why he had sneaked onto Lioli Island. Lin ignored the question. Instead, he asked one of his own, how did the fatty know? The fatty explained that when everyone had fallen into the water, he vaguely saw Lin emerge from beneath the surface. At first, he thought it was an illusion, but after careful reflection, he realized Lin hadn't been part of their group when they left the departed realm. The man was sharp, astute even, yet he was completely oblivious to the chilling edge in Lin's voice. Worse still, he proudly revealed that he was the only one who noticed. When asked if he was absolutely certain, he puffed out his chest and confirmed it confidently, mocking the others as fools for missing it. He never noticed Lin stepping behind him. The sword pierced straight through his chest. The fatty's face turned ashen as life drained from his eyes. He collapsed onto the floor, dead before he could even understand what had happened. Lin calmly withdrew the sword and stored it back inside the Taihang Arc. Looking at the corpse, he felt nothing. The fatty had relied on a bit of cleverness and discovered something dangerous, but instead of fear, he chose arrogance. He rushed over to threaten Lin, never once considering that people from the departed realm themselves obtained household registrations through lies. Now that he held a Lioli Island registration, he truly believed he belonged. Foolish. That immortal master with the obscured face, Sunjang's Tionbalu, all of them acted with extreme caution for a reason. The identity of being a mortal from the land of exile was a secret that could not be exposed. They wouldn't dare investigate openly. Even if they suspected something and learned that the fatty had visited Lin before disappearing, so what? Without a body, nothing could be proven. Lin cleaned away every trace of blood and disposed of the evidence using the Taihang Arc. Days passed. Just as Lin expected, the fatty's disappearance caused barely a ripple. Aside from Such Chongyu, who came once to ask a single question, no one paid it any attention. During this time, Lin quietly gathered information while planning how to reasonably use the treasures hidden within the Taihang Arc. Gradually, he gained a general understanding of Lioli Island. This sea region was known as the Songyun Sea, vast and boundless, with tens of thousands of islands scattered across it. Lioli Island lay in the south-central region and was of medium size. Its name came from the Lioli fish that thrived in its surrounding waters, a fleshy, delicious species popular among mortals. Occasionally, Lioli pearls would form within these fish, and certain elixirs refined by immortal masters required them. Thus, the immortal master presiding over Lioli Island demanded a fixed number of Lioli pearls each year. Fishing was the most popular occupation. 70% of the catch had to be handed over. The remaining 30% could be sold freely. However, fishing required large boats, and the schools of Lioli fish were unpredictable. Locating them required a special spirit lure distributed exclusively by the Lioli Manor. The lure was collected upon return. Private fishing was strictly forbidden. The punishment was immediate execution. Recently, a fleet had returned not only with an enormous haul of Lioli fish, but also after salvaging a shipwreck containing over a dozen chests of gold, silver, and jewels. According to island rules, the same division applied: 30% kept, 70% surrendered. The island erupted. Even the financial supervisor, Stuart Chin, personally came to inspect the haul. Many people began pulling strings in Seagrand to secure spots on the next voyage. With this information, Lin reached a conclusion. If he could go out to sea alone, he could launder the treasures from the Taihang Arc through a fabricated shipwreck. The problem was qualification. Too many people wanted to sail. Further inquiries revealed the structure of power. The island lord had 3 trusted aides: Stuart Jiao, Stuart Zhou, and Stuart Chin. Stuart Jiao handled personnel. Stuart Chin controlled finances. Stuart Zhou oversaw security. But but most fleet assignments rested firmly in Stuart Chin's hands. Stuart Jiao and Stuart Zhou wanted a share, but Stuart Chin tightly controlled the system, allocating them only 1 or 2 fleets at most. Then Lin remembered the registration day. Stuart Jiao's unusual attitude toward him. He didn't know why, but instinct told him that was where he should begin. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality, at the beginning of chapter 13. But Stuart Jiao was not someone the current Lin could meet just because he wished to. With no other choice, Lin decided to approach Sunjang through the heavenly treasure tower. Yet the moment he reached the entrance, reality greeted him with cold indifference. He was stopped before he could even step inside. The guards did not bother hiding their disdain. Without hesitation, they ordered him to leave immediately, citing his status as the reason. Their tone was firm, unyielding, almost rehearsed. One of them demanded to know who Lafon thought he was, and why someone like him would dare request an audience with Sunjang. Lin had long grown accustomed to such treatment. In the immortal Forsaken Land, rejection was routine, and humiliation was currency. So the guard's attitude did not shake him. What truly unsettled him was something else. They hadn't even asked for instructions. Their refusal was immediate, as if they already knew who he was and what the answer would be. That made no sense. The heavenly treasure tower was a business establishment, open to all who sought trade. Driving someone away without even hearing them out defied logic. Something had changed. Lin quickly realized that the tacit cooperation between Sunjang and the people of the departed realm must have been severed, causing Sunjang to distance himself from them by association. To confirm his suspicion, Lin began asking around. Eventually, the truth surfaced from the son of the Prince of Jinan. In order to purge the miasma poisoning his body as quickly as possible, Such Chongyu had made a decisive choice. He volunteered himself as a test subject, and before departing, he signed his name on the 3rd remaining contract. With that single act, all 3 contracts were fulfilled. The contract document dissipated completely, and with it, all ties between the departed realm and Tanbalu were erased. At that moment, everything made sense. It was no wonder the heavenly treasure tower had suddenly turned hostile. No wonder they were deliberately avoiding him. What Lin hadn't expected was Such Chongyu's decisiveness. The young man had warned him not to act so hastily, but Such Chongyu had refused to listen. He had a terminally ill sister. If it wasn't to save her, he would never have been driven to such desperation. Lost in thought, Lin began searching for another path forward. Sunjang might be avoiding him, but Lin was not the type to give up so easily. That day, when Sunjang couldn't help but comfort Such Chongyu, Lin had noticed something. It told him that Sunjang was not a wicked man. His cold exterior was likely nothing more than caution and unwillingness to become entangled with mortals from the immortal Forsaken Land. After all, compared to strangers, anyone would prefer dealing with people whose background they at least partially understood. So Lin returned, and this time he waited patiently, right outside the heavenly treasure tower. But the moment the guards saw Lafon again, their irritation flared. They sneered and asked if he was courting death. In response, Lin deliberately raised his voice, just enough to draw attention. Calm yet firm, he announced that he had come to conduct business with the heavenly treasure tower. The guards attempted to drive him away once more, without discussion. Lin then asked pointedly whether this was how the heavenly treasure tower treated its guests. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Forced by the sudden scrutiny, one guard panicked and hurried inside to relay Lin's words. When he returned, his attitude had changed. Without another word, he quietly led Lafon inside. Lin was escorted to a guest room and offered a seat. A maid soon arrived, serving him a cup of tea. He took a sip, and his expression changed instantly. Delight flickered across his face. At that very moment, Sunjang entered the room. With a neutral tone, he explained that the tea was Du's Pale Dragon, a rare variety that grew only around submarine volcanic craters near Dao Island. There were barely a dozen plants in existence, and with the destruction of Dao Island, the Pale Dragon tea had temporarily become a unique rarity. Lin maintained his smile and replied that he must be fortunate to bask in Elder Sunjang's generosity. Sunjang's expression hardened. He reminded Lin that their affairs in Dali were finished. There should be no further entanglements between him and anyone from the departed realm. So why had Lefan sought him out again? Lin calmly explained that it was a misunderstanding. He was here purely to discuss a business deal, nothing more. Sunjang looked at him with a mocking smile. Aside from Such Chongyu, he couldn't imagine anyone else from that group offering a deal worth considering. Yet Lin did not flinch. He simply stared back. For a moment, just a moment, the silence stretched too long. Something in Lin's gaze caused Sunjang to falter. Reluctantly, he pulled up a chair and sat down. He asked Lafon what business he wished to discuss. Lin spoke calmly, with a composure far beyond his apparent age. He asked whether the heavenly treasure tower was interested in seafaring fleet quotas. Sunjang admitted that every voyage yielded immense profit. Even without salvaged treasures, the Lioli fish and other marine resources alone were enough to amass a fortune. To say the tower wasn't interested would be a lie. However, fleet quotas were firmly controlled by Stuart Chin. Even Stuart Xiao could only secure 1 or 2 slots. Lin was a newcomer. What ability did he have to scheme for such a thing? Lin remained unshaken. He simply requested a meeting with Stuart Jiao. His expression was firm, determined. He stated that if allowed to meet him, he had his own way of persuasion. Silence fell heavily over the room. Sunjong stared at Lin, brow deeply furrowed, weighing the credibility of his words. Then, an authoritative voice cut through the stillness. A young woman entered. She was the shopkeeper. A veil covered half her face, but her presence alone commanded respect. She instructed Sunjong to allow Lefan to meet Stuart Xiao. After all, it was not a difficult matter. However, if Lefan failed, he would be chopped into pieces and thrown into the sea to feed the fish. Sunjong immediately stood and offered his respects as she took control. Lin bowed and expressed sincere gratitude. The shopkeeper brushed it aside, faintly amused. Since Lefan seemed confident, it didn't appear he was merely boasting. Lin replied simply, he always kept his promises. His word was his bond. Granting an audience cost her nothing, and if Lin succeeded, the heavenly treasure tower would benefit as well. According to island rules, 3/10 of each voyage's harvest could be privately kept. Lin said he wanted none of it. Half would go to Stuart Xiao, the other half to the heavenly treasure tower. The shopkeeper was perplexed. What did Lefan want in return? After everything, Lin stated his request plainly. He wished to enter the body-purifying spirit pool, held once every 3 years. Sunjong froze. So did the shopkeeper. Then she burst into laughter. She couldn't believe that at his age, Lin still sought to walk the path of immortality. Lin remained silent, unmoved. When her laughter finally faded, he spoke. Only by seeking eternal life would he have no regrets, even in death. The sincerity of his words silenced her completely. A faint, contemptuous smile formed on her lips, and in the end, she agreed. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 14, with everything settled, the shopkeeper informed Lin that he would need to wait until a suitable date was arranged. Once that time came, she would send someone to notify him. Lin expressed his gratitude once more and prepared to leave. Before departing, he casually added that he was currently staying at house number 7, 6th longitudinal, outside the city walls, and that they could find him there if anything else arose. After Lin left and his footsteps faded beyond earshot, Sunjang finally voiced the question that had been weighing on his mind. He asked about the body-purifying spirit pool slot. The shopkeeper responded calmly. Although competition for the body-purifying spirit pool was fierce every single year, the heavenly treasure tower was not without the strength or influence to compete for a spot. If Lefan truly managed to secure a seafaring fleet, then within just 5 years, the profits generated would be more than enough to cover the cost of a single slot. It was a deal with no loss, only gain. Yet Sunjang quickly noticed something off. He asked why she suddenly seemed uneasy. After a brief pause, the shopkeeper admitted the truth. Lefan's eyes were frightening. They carried a depth that made even her feel unsettled. Sunjang was left speechless. On his way back, Lin stopped by a pharmacy. There, he purchased the profound yellow heart cleansing incantation, along with its corresponding medicinal herbs. Even if everything went smoothly, it would still take 2 years before the body-purifying spirit pool opened again. Rather than wait passively, he decided to attempt cultivation himself. Perhaps, just perhaps, he possessed some extraordinary talent and could purge the miasma from his body without waiting those 2 long years. For the next several days, Lin remained inside his residence, cultivating diligently while waiting for the uncertain meeting with Stuart Jiao. But before that meeting could even happen, shocking news reached his ears. Such Chongyu was dead. When his corpse was sent back, it was no longer recognizable as human, only a twisted mass of flesh and blood. Even worse, the remains would twitch sporadically, sending chills down the spine of anyone who saw it. The people of the departed realm were newcomers. They didn't even have enough money to purchase a burial plot. Their original plan was to bury Such Chongyu at sea. Lin couldn't bring himself to watch that. He took out his own money and arranged for Crush Fry Such Chongyu to be laid to rest properly in the earth. At the burial site, Xiao Hong, heir to the Prince of Zanan from the departed realm, collapsed in grief. He cried bitterly, shaken to his core. As for Lin, he felt little emotion, only a quiet sigh. After all, he barely knew Such Chongyu, but the way the young man carried himself with dignity and an unyielding will was enough to earn respect. He might not have been a once-in-a-century genius, but he was certainly no mediocrity. Among all those from the departed realm, Lin had believed Such Chongyu had the highest chance of carving out a name for himself. Yet even he couldn't survive the very first prerequisite of cultivation, purging the miasma. He died silently. The path of immortality was truly merciless. Soon after, Lin returned to his cultivation. As he practiced the profound yellow heart cleansing incantation, his understanding of its principles deepened steadily. But reality was cruel. Facts proved that he was not some peerless genius. For nearly a month, he secluded himself, cultivating daily without rest. Normally, even someone with mediocre aptitude would experience obvious improvements, clearer thoughts, heightened spirit within half a month. Yet a full month passed, and Lin felt nothing, no change at all. Still, he did not panic. He treated cultivation as a routine, a mandatory task to be completed completed every day. Another half-month slipped by. Finally, someone from the Heavenly Treasure Tower arrived with a messenger. Lin was led to a courtyard owned by the tower, where he met Stuart Jiao at last. He greeted him respectfully, mentioning that it had been some time. Stuart Jiao ignored the pleasantries and went straight to the point. He had heard that Lin wanted a seafaring fleet quota. It was a bold appetite. But what backing did he have? Lin agreed openly. He didn't reveal any backing, but calmly pointed out that fleets existed for one reason alone: profit. Then he asked Stuart Jiao a question: which was more profitable, catching lay fish or salvaging treasures directly from sunken ships? Salvaging treasure could easily surpass several fishing trips, but such opportunities were rare. In over a decade on the island, Stuart Jiao recalled only a handful of truly massive hauls. Lin then spoke with confidence. If he commanded a fleet, he could guarantee that every voyage would return with a fixed amount of treasure. Stuart Jiao stared at him intently. After a moment, he calmly stroked his beard and admitted that Lin was telling the truth. Lin was stunned. He hadn't exaggerated. But how did Stuart Jiao know? Stuart Jiao explained. He was born with a unique pair of eyes capable of recognizing talent and discerning truth from falsehood. When Lin spoke, Stuart Jiao saw a soft white glow surrounding him. It meant sincerity, with no hidden malice. Lin was astonished. He suddenly recalled their first meeting during registration. Stuart Jiao's attitude toward him had been subtly different. Back then, Stuart Jiao had seen wealth and blood, enough blood to know Lin was no ordinary man. That was why he had been polite, forming good karma in passing. That also meant Stuart Jiao likely knew Sun Zhang hadn't spoken the truth that day. But with an immortal presiding over the island, lies didn't matter much. As long as people minded their own business, nothing would happen. Besides, gathering refugees was the immortal master's own order. Why would they trouble Sun Zhang for following it? Returning to the present, Lin asked whether Stuart Jiao could reconsider the fleet quota. Now that he knew Lin spoke the truth, Stuart Jiao sat down and replied calmly. Lin was still a newcomer with no foundation. Handing him a fleet outright would cause dissatisfaction. Instead, Stuart Jiao proposed a compromise. Lin would join the fleet on its next voyage. If he truly could salvage treasure every time, then after a few trips, the crew would be convinced by his ability. Only then could Lin rightfully take command. Lin accepted the arrangement and thanked him sincerely, praising his thorough judgment. Back at the Heavenly Treasure Tower, the shopkeeper was utterly stunned. Lin had convinced Stuart Jiao far too easily. With confirmation from Sun Zhang, she was now completely convinced that Lin wasn't bluffing. He truly had the confidence to secure a fleet. At the same time, Sun Zhang began wondering just what kind of backing Lin actually possessed. Then the shopkeeper issued another order. She instructed Sun Zhang to send Lin the title deed to the vacant courtyard on East Street. Sun Zhang was dumbfounded. That courtyard had cost them a fortune. It was meant to be used to bribe Stuart Chin. How could they give it away so casually? Even if they were to give it, shouldn't they wait until Lin secured the fleet first? The shopkeeper cut him off. If they waited until then, she said, a mere courtyard would no longer be enough to befriend Lin. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 15, Sang Soon sent someone to deliver the title deed to Lin. Naturally, Lin did not refuse the gift. He had little to pack, so on the very same day, he moved into the courtyard on East Street. Compared to the slums outside the city, the environment here was vastly superior. Quiet, orderly, and far removed from the chaos of refugee life. After settling in, Lin politely declined the maids sent by the Heavenly Treasure Tower. He preferred solitude. From that day on, he lived quietly in the courtyard, waiting for the fleet's next departure. Originally, Lin thought the wait would not be long, but fate had other plans. Before the fleet could set sail, an unforeseen disaster struck. A massive windstorm descended upon Lioli Island. The devastation was immediate and overwhelming. Even from within the city, Lin could feel the violent tremors shaking his newly acquired residence. Alarmed, he rushed out into the courtyard and froze. Behind the city, several towering storms churned violently, restrained only by what appeared to be an immense formation. Outside that formation, the storm's destructive force was laid bare, howling winds tearing through the land with barely any rain or snow, yet capable of annihilating everything in their path. Unlike Dao Island, which had been destroyed by a similar catastrophe not long ago, Lioli Island was fortunate. An immortal master presided here. Soon after, an announcement spread across the island. The Grand Protective Formation had been activated. There was no need for panic. Everyone was ordered to remain inside their homes until the storm passed. The people of Lioli Island rejoiced. They praised the immortal master endlessly, worshipping him as a merciful protector sent by heaven itself. Lin, however, did not join their celebration. He stood silently, eyes fixed on the protective formation, absorbing every detail he could. The blue light of the Grand Formation flowed endlessly, weaving through countless unseen pathways. Within it, faint characters appeared and vanished, ancient, profound, and incomprehensible. The earlier howling winds, like ghosts crying in anguish, were completely shut out by the barrier of light. Outside was utter destruction. Inside was absolute calm. Lin's heart trembled. Is this the means of immortals? Before he could think further, his pupils suddenly constricted. A bolt of heavenly divine thunder crashed violently against the Grand Formation. The collision unleashed an overwhelming pressure. Lin's knees buckled instantly. He was forced to the ground, coughing up a mouthful of fresh blood. He was utterly stunned. Such terrifying power, and it was only a single strike. Even worse, this was not an isolated incident. Divine thunder continued to descend around the island, striking again and again like celestial punishment. Lean clenched his teeth, fear surging through him. Was his 10th lifetime going to end here? Fortunately, the island's Grand Protective Formation proved far more resilient than he had imagined. It endured. It did not shatter. Time dragged on. Lean had no idea how long passed, but eventually the raging waves and winds began to weaken. Slowly, reluctantly. The storm had arrived swiftly, but it refused to leave. Within the chaos of wind and rain, day and night blurred together. Lean estimated that 2 or 3 full days passed before the storm finally receded. Later, he heard island residents discussing the disaster. This storm, they said, was actually relatively small. 15 years ago, a windstorm several times stronger had ravaged Lioli Island. Back then, even the Grand Protective Formation had barely held on, forced to shrink its protective range. After that catastrophe, the island's territory had been reduced to only 1/3 of its original size. It was only through years of gathering refugees from other islands that Lioli Island had slowly recovered. Lean stared up at the gloomy sky, his heart still unsettled. The might of heaven and earth was far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. A few days after the storm, new instructions were issued. Every household on Lioli Island was required to inspect whether the Grand Protective Formation had suffered any damage. The process was simple. Lioli Manor distributed spirit talismans. Each household was to hang one inside their home for several days and nights. If a red light appeared, it would indicate a damaged node within the formation. The Grand Protective Formation contained 367,800 nodes. Not a single one could be allowed to malfunction. Under the will of the Immortal Master, and for the sake of survival, everything on Lioli Island was temporarily halted to prioritize inspection and maintenance. In the past, the Immortal Master personally oversaw such matters, but this time it was said that the spirit stones sustaining the landmass were nearly exhausted. The Immortal Master had returned to Onion Island to retrieve more. The inspection followed strict cycles. 360 flashes of the spirit talisman formed one small cycle. 360 small cycles formed one large cycle. If no red light appeared within one large cycle, the landmass was deemed unharmed. Lean was deeply impressed. Such a vast formation, yet so intricately designed, its construction was almost beyond imagination. 5 days later, the results were announced. The Grand Protective Formation was intact. With the Immortal Master's return, the people of Lioli Island finally breathed a collective sigh of relief. Life gradually returned to normal. In the months that followed, refugees from other islands arrived intermittently, seeking refuge. These survivors were few. Most inhabitants of their islands had perished in the recent storm. The Tongyun Sea was vast beyond measure, dotted with countless islands. Only those with special resources were fortunate enough to have immortal masters guarding them. During these months, Lean did not waste a single day. He continued cultivating the profound yellow heart cleansing incantation without fail. Finally, results appeared. Both his physiological and psychological age limits increased once more. The improvement was subtle, but undeniable. His spirit felt steadier, his vitality slightly enhanced. Encouraged, he continued. Another month passed. At last, news arrived from Stuart Jiao. The windstorms in the Tongyun Sea had completely dissipated. The fleet's next departure was imminent. 3 days later, at Lioli Island's pier, Lean met Tongguan, the man Stuart Jiao had instructed him to find. After a brief exchange, Lean boarded the ship. Meanwhile, aboard the vessel, murmurs spread among the crew. Some wondered what madness had possessed the island lord to enforce such an assessment. The fleet with the smallest harvest on this voyage would be deemed unqualified, its future sailing rights revoked entirely. How could this be good news? All of it, they said, stemmed from the windstorm. Rumors claimed that Coral Island to the south had lost its protective formation entirely. The island was wiped off the map, and the tribute it owed had now been transferred onto Lioli Island's shoulders. The crew whispered anxiously, questioning how they were supposed to survive under such pressure. They were told it was only temporary. They merely needed to compensate for what was owed. Their leader, Zhang Hawa, snapped at them for their cowardice. Why not look on the bright side? The first place fleet would receive extra rewards. The harvest share had even been raised from 30% to 50%. The crew scoffed. First place? With their fishing skills, they could barely meet the quota on normal voyages. One crewman muttered that this would probably be their last trip anyway. Another joked they might as well not return at all, become pirates, free and unrestrained. The idea sounded tempting. Zhang Hawa waved them off, confidence burning in his eyes. This time, he said, there was a capable person aboard. He introduced Lefon to the crew and made a bold declaration. This voyage would return fully loaded. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 16, the crew reacted with open skepticism. When they laid eyes on Lean, pale, clean, and refined, they couldn't help but doubt him. This man didn't look like someone who had ever faced the brutality of the sea. Had he even stepped on a deck before today? Zhang Hawa immediately barked at them. Blind fools! Can't you recognize a noble person when you see one? He declared loudly that Li Fan was a great talent personally invited by Stuart Jiao. Not only that, he would soon be taking over their ship. From this day forward, they had better show respect to their future captain. The words hit the crew like a spark to dry tinder. They exploded in outrage. Zhang Hua had captained the Tong Yuan for nearly 10 years. How could he simply surrender it? One crewman shouted that Zhang Hua had once saved his life. If someone was trying to drive him out of his position, he would be the first to oppose it. He would not tolerate such injustice. Zhang Hua chuckled humorously and nodded, feigning modesty. In truth, he was deeply pleased. This was precisely the reaction he wanted. A calculated display, a subtle intimidation tactic. He wanted to show Lin who truly commanded loyalty on this ship. With a sly smile, he observed Lin's expression as the crew's voices grew louder. Some even suggested that once they set sail, they could simply throw Li Fan overboard to feed the fish. After all, deaths at sea were common. Zhang Hua finally raised his hand to calm them down. Acting reluctant, he sighed. Even though you all think highly of me, this ship belongs to Stuart Jiao. We merely sell our lives for him. If he wants to change personnel, what choice do I have? Lin listened quietly. Having lived through multiple lifetimes, he saw through the tactic immediately. Moral coercion, public pressure, manufactured loyalty, petty tricks. He stepped forward, his voice firm and commanding. So you do not trust Stuart Jiao? The deck fell silent. He entrusted me with this ship. Are you suggesting the Lord's aid has poor judgment? No one responded. I promised Stuart Jiao that I would find treasures every time we set sail. If you doubt me, you doubt him as well. I will not allow him to lose face because of your suspicions. The crew hesitated. Stuart Jiao's reputation was unquestionable. His eyes had never misjudged a person. If he trusted Lin, perhaps this man truly possessed some ability. Zhang Hao's expression darkened. His carefully staged manipulation had collapsed in just a few sentences. Anger simmered beneath his surface. He pointed sharply at Lin. Find treasures every voyage? That's nonsense. Absolute rubbish. You think I'm a fool? You must have used connections to snatch this position. His voice grew cold. Since you like talking big, let's see how you perform. With that, he ordered the ship to set sail. The Tong Yuan moved without wind. It did not rely on sails or oars. Instead, micro-spell formations embedded within its structure were powered by spirit stones, propelling the vessel steadily across the vast sea. The ship carried a spirit lure, an instrument capable of detecting nearby traces of Lioli fish, but its range was limited. Skilled crew members had to determine the general region of fish schools first before activating it effectively. And when windstorms or migrations disrupted patterns, experience meant nothing. It became a search for a needle in a haystack, relying purely on luck. And this voyage, luck was scarce. More than half a month passed. They caught only ordinary fish schools, some common marine minerals, nothing remarkable. The crew's faces grew longer each day. Even Zhang Hua felt anxiety creeping into his heart. This voyage carried punishment for the lowest harvest. They had less than a month before they were required to return. If things continued like this, they would surely rank last. Standing at the deck, Zhang Hua stared at the sky. He silently prayed for protection from the immortal master. At that moment, Lin emerged from the cabin. Zhang Hua couldn't resist sneering. Oh, you finally decided to show yourself? If not for your daily meals, I'd have thought you died in there. Lin ignored the sarcasm. I need a small boat. Zhang Hua blinked. There are sunken treasures nearby, Lin said calmly. Zhang Hua stared at him in disbelief. Are you joking? I can see jewelry shining beneath the deep sea, Lin continued. The light is fading. The opportunity is fleeting. Prepare a boat immediately. There was no hesitation in his tone. Something about his certainty made Zhang Hao's heart skip. He barked orders. Within minutes, a small boat was prepared. Before departing, Lin gave one final instruction. Do not follow me. Wait for my signal. Why? Someone demanded. You are too noisy, Lin replied coldly. Noise interferes with my sight. The crew fell speechless. As Lin rowed away, one crewman whispered, what if he's running away? Zhang Hua dismissed it instantly. The sea is endless. He brought no provisions. Where would he go? 2 hours passed. Then they saw it. A signal from the distance. They hurriedly maneuvered the Tong Yuan toward the location. When they arrived, Lin pointed calmly toward a specific area of water. It's there. Zhang Hua gave immediate orders. The nets were cast. Divers prepared. Less than an hour later, 16 chests of gold and silver were hauled onto the deck. Under the moonlight, they gleamed brilliantly. Zhang Hua stood frozen. In his entire life, he had never witnessed such fortune. And it was not luck. It was Lin. The man had not exaggerated. He truly found treasure. Every word he had spoken was true. The realization struck deeply. This ability, this impossible certainty, placed Lin in a completely different realm. A person extraordinary beyond ordinary measure. Almost like Stuart Jiao himself. Zhang Hua felt shame rise within him. He had mocked him, tested him, nearly antagonized him. And for what? To protect a tiny fleet. Compared to Lin, his ambitions now felt laughably small. Regret flooded his chest. He understood clearly he needed to apologize immediately. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 17, the moment Lin stepped back onto the deck, the atmosphere had completely changed. Zhang Hua, who had once tried to suppress him in front of the crew, now walked forward with lowered head and clasped fists. Without hesitation, he bowed deeply. His voice voice was sincere. He apologized for his arrogance, for doubting Lean's ability, for attempting to test him with petty tricks. There was no mockery left in his tone, only respect. Lean dismissed him calmly, without pride, without resentment, as if none of it had ever mattered. Then he returned to his cabin to rest. With 16 chests of treasures secured, the Sangyuan immediately stopped fishing and turned back toward Lioli Island. No one dared relax. Until they returned safely to shore, the weight of those glittering chests pressed heavily on every heart aboard. At the harbor, Zhang Ha raised a hand. "Don't dock yet." He ordered Luan to quietly slip into the water and notify Stuart Xiao personally. He wanted Stuart Xiao to send his own trusted men to conduct the inventory. Luan nodded and vanished into the sea without a splash. Turning to the crew, Zhang Ha declared boldly that, barring the unexpected, their harvest would be the largest among all ships this voyage. According to island rules, they were entitled to 50%. If outsiders handled the counting, there would surely be deductions or mistakes. He would not rest easy unless it was done by their own people. The crew cheered loudly. Even losing a fraction of their share would pain them to death. After some time, the Sangyuan finally docked, but when routine inventory personnel approached, they were blocked by Zhang Hawa and the crew. The officials demanded an explanation. Silence. No one moved aside. One of the officials sneered, glancing at the ship's draft, and assumed they must have returned empty-handed. From the look of it, Zhang Hawa's position as captain was nearing its end. The crew nearly erupted into argument, but Zhang Ha stopped them swiftly. There was no need to quarrel. Lin watched everything quietly. He understood now why Zhang Ha had held his captaincy for nearly a decade. It wasn't brilliance, but steadiness, experience, and the ability to control men. Only his background had limited him. Soon after, Stuart Xiao arrived personally with his men. Under countless watchful eyes, 16 chests of jewels were carried down from the ship. The dock exploded into chaos. Word spread like wildfire across Lioli Island. The Tongguan ship had struck a massive fortune. Meanwhile, inside the heavenly treasure tower, Sun Jiang burst through the doors, breathless and flustered. When the shopkeeper asked what had happened, he stammered about the Tongguan ship. Treasures. More than 10 chests. At first, the shopkeeper saw no reason for excitement. If someone wanted to digest that many treasures on the island, they would have to go through the heavenly treasure tower anyway. Then, realization struck. The ship Lin had boarded a month ago. Sun Jiang confirmed it between gasps. It was no wonder Lin had persuaded Stuart Xiao so confidently. He had been absolutely certain he would find treasure. Sun Jiang even dared to say that Lin's ability resembled that of their grand shopkeeper. The shopkeeper's eyes sharpened immediately. She ordered Sun Jiang to arrange a meeting with Lin at once. She wanted to know when he could be invited for a meal. The tower was to be cleaned thoroughly and the title deed delivered to Lin without hesitation. After Sun Jiang left, the shopkeeper stood alone, thinking, could Lin possess the legendary spirit-channeling treasure physique? A constitution said to sense rare treasures within a certain range. Her elder sister, the grand shopkeeper Inuding, possessed that very physique. It was through that heaven-defying ability that she had built the heavenly treasure tower from nothing into a chamber of commerce spanning the Sun Yun Sea. If another spirit-channeling treasure physique had appeared, that would change everything. At Stuart Xiao's manor, Lin paid a visit. Stuart Xiao praised him sincerely. 16 chests on his first voyage, Lin had given him a tremendous surprise. Lin responded calmly. The harvest was substantial, but such fortune would be difficult to replicate. Stuart Xiao agreed. How could one have that luck every time? Still, the gain from this single voyage was enough for him to operate a separate fleet under Lin's name. Lin thanked him. Then Stuart Xiao mentioned he had heard Lin was desperately seeking a quota for the body-purifying spirit pool. Lin confirmed it. Even endless wealth turns to dust after 100 years. Only by pursuing immortality, seeking the Tao, and touching eternity could this life be meaningful. Stuart Xiao admired him. To still yearn for the Tao at his age, he himself felt inferior. Over a decade ago, he had once saved an immortal master. The master invited him to cultivate, but he believed he had already passed the prime age. The older one grows, the deeper the bodily miasma, the more painful the cleansing. Now he felt regret. But there was no medicine for regret in this world. Among hundreds of thousands of mortals on Lioli Island, people like Lin were rare. However, regarding the spirit pool quota, Stuart Xiao could not help. The island's immortal master personally presided over the opening of the body-purifying spirit pool. Quotas were decided based on contribution points. 1 year prior, required materials would be announced, and each family would gather and submit them. But Lin need not worry too much. The Heavenly Treasure Tower had branches across every island in the Sun Yun Sea. In terms of gathering rare materials, few could compare. Hearing this, Lin silently adjusted his priorities. When Lin returned to his courtyard, Sun Jiang was already waiting outside with the title deed. It was obvious he had been there for some time. Though surprised, Lin was indeed interested in meeting the the shopkeeper again. He asked about her intentions, learned she wished to host him, and agreed readily. However, he refused the title deed to Tingyu Tower. That evening, they met. The shopkeeper formally introduced herself as In Eugene. Lin introduced himself just as formally. In Eugene smiled faintly, noting how concise his introduction was. Lin replied that he was merely a simple mortal. There was nothing worth elaborating. In Eugene then asked, was the spirit channeling treasure physique also not worth mentioning? Lin admitted sincerely he had no idea what that was, but his composure revealed nothing. In Eugene doubted him. If he did not possess that physique, how did he locate treasure in the vast sea? Lin answered simply, it was just a feeling. That reply irritated her slightly. She thought he was denying the obvious. Yet, seeing that he truly seemed unaware, she explained the spirit channeling treasure physique in detail. Lin listened quietly. Then, after a pause, he asked a series of questions that stunned her completely. If her sister also possessed this physique, how old was she? What did she look like? Where was she 20 years ago? And where was she now? The room grew still. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 18, Yujin suddenly went pale. For a brief second, panic flashed across her eyes as she stared at Lin. Are you our long-lost father or something? The words came out almost instinctively, but just as quickly, she dismissed the thought. It didn't make sense. Lin looked nothing like her or her sister. Lin was momentarily baffled. He calmly replied that he was merely curious, nothing more. But Yujin misunderstood his silence. She assumed he was curious about his own kind, about others who might share the same mysterious constitution, and strangely, she understood that feeling. Lin did not correct her, so she continued. She and her elder sister, In Yuding, were originally from Yelan Island in the north. Their parents had died in a disaster when they were young, leaving the two sisters to rely solely on each other. In her memories, they survived by begging. Every day was uncertainty. Every meal was a question mark. But at some point, she couldn't even remember when, her sister began finding valuable items in the strangest places. Hidden coins, buried trinkets, lost valuables others had overlooked. Their lives improved day by day. Eventually, In Yuding single-handedly founded the Heavenly Treasure Tower, and yet it had been years since she last saw her. Lin asked where her sister had gone. 3 years ago, a passing immortal master chose In Yuding and took her away. At first, letters came back, delivered through trusted intermediaries. She said she was safe. Then, silence. When Lin heard she had been taken by an immortal master, he wondered if she had been brought away to cultivate the Tao. In Yujin's expression darkened, if only that were the case. In Yuding had used a secret code in her letters, something only the two sisters understood. She warned that her situation was extremely dangerous. If contact ever ceased, it would mean misfortune had befallen her, and she explicitly told Inafanes, In Yujin, not to look for her. Lin asked whether this trouble had been caused by her special physique. In Yujin shook her head. Her sister was still mortal. The treasures she could sense were only valuable to mortals. To true immortal masters, they were no better than scrap metal. Immortal masters had noticed her sister's constitution before, but none had cared. She still did not understand why that final immortal master had taken her away. Though her sister's fate likely leaned toward disaster, the foundation she left behind still stood. The Heavenly Treasure Tower could not collapse in her hands. In Yujin admitted honestly, she did not possess her sister's miraculous ability. After her disappearance, business worsened day by day. A few misjudged transactions led to massive financial losses. The veterans within the tower began to resent her. Some even conspired with outsiders, intending to force her out and divide the tower's assets. Only their lingering fear of In Yuding, who had been taken by an immortal master, kept them from acting openly. So, under the pretense of expanding markets, In Yujin relocated from Yelan Island to Lioli Island, intending to lie low and rebuild strength. She had planned to accumulate power quietly over several years before settling accounts, but she never expected to encounter another spirit channeling treasure physique here. If Lin helped her, she believed she could reclaim full control of the Heavenly Treasure Tower. Lin understood her reasoning, but he made his stance clear. He was not interested in the affairs of her tower. His only desire was cultivation. She had promised that if he helped her secure a fleet, she would help him obtain a quota for the body-purifying spirit pool. Was she intending to go back on that agreement? In Yujin immediately clarified. The Heavenly Treasure Tower valued integrity above all. What they promised, they would fulfill. However, before she could finish, Lin cut her off. His expression turned cold. His tone dropped with a bone-chilling sharpness. He had sensed a condition coming, and Yujin quickly looked away. Even if he entered the body-purifying spirit pool, so what? Expelling bodily miasma was extremely difficult. Each year, barely half succeeded, and the older one was, the higher the chance of failure. Lin was no longer young. Was he certain he could succeed? Everyone only had one chance in their lifetime. If he failed, his path to immortality would end forever. But Lin's voice did not waver. Even if the success rate was only 50%, it was enough. In Yujin sighed. Then, she revealed something crucial. In her sister's last letter, she had sent along an elixir, the dust-leaving pill. According to the letter, taking this pill would greatly increase the probability of successfully expelling miasma. Combined with the spirit pool, even at Lin's age, the success rate would be significantly higher. Lin asked why she had not taken it herself. In Yujin answered plainly, not everyone was obsessed with immortality. Her obsession was business, protecting the Heavenly Treasure treasure tower her sister built. Lin nodded in full understanding. Everyone walks their own path. Encouraged, Yujin asked if he had agreed. Lin rose and walked toward the door. I will consider it, he said calmly. 3 days. She agreed to wait. She only hoped she had not misjudged him. After discreet inquiries, Lin confirmed that Yujin had not lied about the dust-leaving pill. 3 days later, he met her again and agreed. They reached an agreement. Before the spirit pool opened, Lin would help the Heavenly Treasure Tower collect treasures regularly. When the spirit pool opened, Yujin would give him the dust-leaving pill. To show sincerity, she presented the title deed to Tingyu Tower. This time, Lin accepted it. Thus, he moved once again. Tingyu Tower stood at the center of Lioli Island. Though located in a bustling market, it felt secluded, like a hidden mountain retreat amidst chaos. Over the next year, Lin completed 3 official voyages for Lioli Island. Each time, he returned with multiple chests of treasure, shocking the island and securing a fleet quota for the Heavenly Treasure Tower. After that, whenever the tower's fleet sailed, Lin accompanied them. Within a single year, the tower's earnings nearly equaled the total of the previous 5 years combined. Lin's prestige soared. Within the Heavenly Treasure Tower, he was viewed with both respect and fear. But he did not neglect cultivation. In his spare time, he tirelessly practiced the profound yellow heart cleansing incantation. Until one day, something happened that filled him with quiet joy. The charging progress of his truth returning system accelerated. Previously, the system charged solely with the natural passage of time, reaching 100% every 20 years. Even after slowly rising to the upper limit of 200%, it would not increase further. Lin had been in the cultivation world for over a year. Based on prior patterns, progress should have been around 6 to 7%. Instead, it had reached 15%, nearly double the expected speed. Aside from cultivating the heart-cleansing incantation, he had done nothing else unusual. The conclusion was clear. The profound yellow heart-cleansing incantation could accelerate the charging speed of his truth-returning system. Furthermore, the upper limits of both his physiological and psychological age increased significantly. Time passed quietly in cultivation. Soon, only 1 year remained before the opening of the body-purifying spirit pool. Yujin arrived with visible excitement. Lioli Island had announced the list of materials required by the Immortal Masters this time. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of Chapter 19, the list of required materials spread quickly across Lioli Island. Most of the items were common and relatively easy to obtain, except for one, Star Sea Quicksand. Even Sunjang had never heard of it. Yujin hadn't either. It was immediately clear this strange material would be the key to competing for the spirit pool quota. Yujin frowned. If they had to inquire about it, they would likely need to consult the Manhwa Chamber of Commerce. These people were infamous, like reincarnated hungry ghosts, greedy beyond measure. Sunjang feared they would have to bleed heavily to get any useful information. But Lin was resolute. No matter the cost, he would obtain the Star Sea Quicksand. The spirit pool quota was not optional. It was destiny. The Wanhua Chamber of Commerce was no local power of the Tongyun Sea. It originated from a distant continent, tens of thousands of miles away. Rumors said it was backed by an immortal master, which allowed it to cross endless seas and conduct trade even on this remote island. They still had a year to prepare. A merchant envoy from the Wanhua Chamber would pass through the Tongyun Sea in 3 months. Yujin planned to contact him then, but Lin cautioned her. They could not place all their hopes on a single source. Over the past year, Lioli Island had accepted refugees from all over the Tongyun Sea. Among them, there might be someone who recognized this so-called Star Sea Quicksand. They should discreetly inquire. Furthermore, other factions on the island would also be searching for it. They needed to monitor their movements carefully. Once the material list was announced, the entire island stirred. Even ordinary mortals who had no interest in cultivation heard that major factions were frantically searching for something called Star Sea Quicksand. By chance, Xiaohong heard the name. He immediately went to Tingyu Tower to seek out Lin. Lin asked calmly what business brought him here. Xiaohong explained he had recently heard that Lin was searching for Star Sea Quicksand. Lin admitted it openly. At his age, if he wanted to cultivate, he could only rely on the body-purifying spirit pool. Do you know about it? Lin asked. Xiaohong nodded. Back when the Immortal Master descended upon their homeland of Dali, he had promised that if the required materials were gathered, he would take a group to the cultivation world. Among those materials was Star Sea Quicksand. Lin frowned. He had no recollection of this. Xiaohong explained that when the list was announced publicly, several items had already been removed. Those were reserved quotas assigned to major noble families. The Prince of John's Manor, his own family, had been tasked with collecting Star Sea Quicksand. Lin did not waste time. State your conditions. Xiaohong hesitated. He remembered when Su Chongyu died and nearly received no burial. Lin had paid for it. That counted as a favor. He knew he shouldn't ask for more, but life on Lioli Island was harsh. He still lived in the slums. He did not possess Lin's abilities. Lin understood immediately and interrupted him gently. He need not say more. If Xiaohong could provide useful information, he could name his price. Xiaohong's eyes lit up. He revealed the truth. Star Sea Quicksand was not rare. The Immortal Master simply used a different name. It was meteorite iron, iron fallen from the sky. Lin's curiosity sharpened. Would any meteorite iron suffice? Xiaohong shook his head and listed the requirements carefully. First, the appearance must be good, no heavily pitted or uneven surfaces. Second, a single piece must weigh at least 50 jin. Lin memorized every detail. When all was said, Lin asked what Xiaohong wanted. The request was simple: a decent courtyard, a lighter job, and perhaps a few servants to help manage the courtyard. Lin felt unexpectedly relieved. The son of the dignified Prince of Zhan, and this was all he asked? He even encouraged Xiaohong to ask for more, while Lin still had influence. But Xiaohong refused. He knew his limits. Living comfortably without exhausting himself was enough. Sudden wealth would only invite disaster. Lin respected that wisdom. As Xiaohong prepared to leave, Lin asked one more question. Did he not wish to cultivate? After all the hardships to reach this cultivation world? Xiaohong smiled awkwardly. He had no interest. Reading the profound yellow heart cleansing incantation alone made him drowsy. Lin said nothing further. He went directly to the heavenly treasure tower. When he relayed that Star Sea quicksand was meteorite iron, Yujin was skeptical. Xiaohong could be lying. They needed verification. Lin reminded her about the Manhwa Chamber's merchant. When he arrived, they could probe him carefully. Yujin agreed. If they could save money, all the better. Regardless, they must secretly begin purchasing meteorite iron, meeting the requirements. Not many knew the truth yet, but that would change. They would mix meteorite iron purchases with other goods to conceal intent. At the same time, they would release false rumors about Star Sea quicksand to muddy the waters. Yujin was impressed. Before, she thought Lin extraordinary only because of the spirit channeling treasure physique. Now she saw he possessed meticulous strategy as well. She asked what he had done before coming to Lioli Island. I taught people how to read, Lin replied plainly. She pouted, unconvinced. Before leaving, Lin instructed her to handle everything. He needed to focus on cultivation. Unless absolutely necessary, he was not to be disturbed, and Xiaohong's matter should be arranged as promised. Yujin agreed. Yet privately she was puzzled. Since meeting Lin, every matter connected to him carried signs of great auspiciousness. Ever since childhood, she had possessed a subtle ability to sense whether events were auspicious or ominous. Unlike her sister, she could not sense treasures, but she could sense fortune, and before meeting Lin, she had never encountered a truly great auspicious omen. Now, every task related to him glowed with promise, even helping Xiaohong. It made no logical sense, but she trusted her intuition. She would support him fully. Under her command, the Heavenly Treasure Tower mobilized at full capacity. Fake news about Star Sea quicksand flooded the market. At first, other factions remained cautious, suspecting a trap, but one faction thought differently. Buy first, even if fake, and resell later. Soon, large-scale purchases began. Other factions panicked and joined. Prices skyrocketed. Chaos engulfed Lioli Island. And at the center of it all, Lin remained inside Tingyu Tower, cultivating quietly. 3 months passed. Yujin finally contacted the merchant envoy of the Tianhua Chamber of Commerce. Early one morning, she and Lin boarded a small boat, left Lioli Island, and sailed dozens of miles north to the agreed sea region. Suddenly, a flying ark appeared in the sky. Magnificent, imposing. They were welcomed aboard. After all, it had been a long time since shopkeeper and Yujin last visited. And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality. At the beginning of chapter 20, the flying ark descended from the sky like a silent mountain. It hovered above the sea before slowly settling upon the water's surface, its hull gleaming with faint spiritual light. Yujin secretly laughed to herself. Surely, Lin must be shocked. After all, this was a flying ark, something mortals only heard about in legends. But when she glanced at him, there was no reaction, no widened eyes, no intake of breath, not even a flicker of surprise. Her lips twitched in irritation. What kind of person was this? After 3 years without contact, Yujin and the merchant walker exchanged pleasantries. He sighed about how quickly time passed before turning his gaze toward Lin. And this gentleman is? Yujin introduced Lin as an elder hired by the Heavenly Treasure Tower. The merchant walker immediately offered a formal greeting. Then he turned back to Yujin. We must inspect the goods first. After this transaction, it may be difficult for us to meet again. Her brows tightened. What do you mean? Has something happened? He shook his head. I don't know the reason. A few days ago, headquarters suddenly ordered all merchant walkers operating in the Tongyun Sea to cease operations and return immediately. If I hadn't already scheduled this trade with you, I would already be on my way back. His tone was serious. We must conclude this quickly. A chill ran through in Yujin's heart. The Heavenly Treasure Tower had flourished largely because it was backed by the Wanhua Chamber of Commerce. If the Wanhua Chamber withdrew from the Tongyun Sea, what would happen to her tower? More unsettling was something else. Her ability to sense fortune and misfortune had not reacted at all. No warning, no omen. The merchant walker called her name, snapping her out of her thoughts. She apologized and led them below deck. Inside the cabin, Lin personally displayed the goods. 16 pairs of jade 28 discs, 23 pieces of coral, 46 luminous pearls, and finally, 3 pieces of star sea quicksand. The merchant walker froze. He rushed forward and lifted one piece effortlessly. Lean's eyes narrowed slightly. Each piece weighed at least 50 jin, yet in the man's hands, they seemed weightless. The merchant walker examined all three and nodded in satisfaction. Excellent quality. Shopkeeper in Yujin, your luck is impressive. To think you managed to gather such fine star sea quicksand. The confirmation was subtle, but Lean and In Yujin exchanged a glance of unmistakable delight. Xiaohong had spoken the truth. The merchant walker, unaware he had revealed the answer, concluded the inspection with clear satisfaction. Because they would not meet again for a long time, he generously invited them to dine aboard the flying ark. After eating and drinking their fill, he led them to the ark's warehouse. These, he said proudly, are items I collected from various islands across the Tongyun Sea. Some were priceless treasures. Others he did not understand at all. He simply purchased them because they looked unusual. If anything interests you, choose a few pieces. In Yujin's eyes lit up. To her, this was like a rat falling into a jar of rice. Lean watched her delight with quiet amusement. To him, they were all mortal treasures, meaningless. After 300 years of cycles, he had grown indifferent to such things. If it did not concern immortal cultivation, it held no value. Still, he accompanied her casually. They were given the time of one stick of incense to browse. In Yujin admired a jade bracelet. It's beautifully crafted. The material is decent, Lean replied absently. Then, he picked up a blue pearl to pass the time. His system suddenly activated. Chargeable item detected. Lean's pupils contracted. The blue pearl was identified as a wondrous item of heaven and earth. Name, Sanghai Pearl. Status, incubating, not yet fully formed. Option, recharge. For a brief moment, his heartbeat quickened. A wondrous item, and one still in its infancy. He forced himself to calm down. His expression remained indifferent as he casually placed the pearl back among the other items. He showed no interest. He continued strolling as though nothing had happened. When time was called, he did not spare the pearl another glance. In Yujin looked at him. You're not choosing anything? Wu laughed and placed a hand on Lean's shoulder. You enter a treasure mountain and return empty-handed? Wouldn't that be looking down on me? Refusing would indeed be impolite. Lean gestured casually. I'll take that pearl and the jade tree statue. Wu chuckled. Good eye. I found that jade statue on a desolate island at the northernmost part of the Tongyun Sea. A primitive tribe worshipped it for thousands of years. Quite miraculous. Keeping it at home calms the mind and strengthens the body. And the pearl? Lean asked lightly. Bought it from a fisherman on Luan Island. Lean merely nodded. The transaction concluded. The Tianhua chamber obtained a large batch of treasures. In Yujin received substantial gold, silver, and several selected items. On the return journey, In Yujin's harvest was abundant, yet her expression was troubled. You're worried about the tower's future, Lean observed. She nodded. Without the Wanhua chamber, they would lose a critical sales channel. She did not understand why they were withdrawing. Lean spoke calmly. When a cart reaches the mountain, there will be a way through. Worry solved nothing. They returned to Lioli Island at night. Lean went straight back to Tingyu Tower. His purpose in meeting the merchant walker had been simple: to verify the identity of Starsea quicksand. He had not expected to obtain something far more valuable. The Sanghai Pearl. Why was it called Sanghai? Did it truly contain an ocean within? His thoughts deepened. Then, a rustling sound, a knock at his door. It was not yet dawn. Who would disturb him at such an hour? His hand moved silently. He drew a short knife from his sleeve. His voice was cold. Who is it? And that brings us to the end of this part of my simulated path to immortality.